Chapter 1. The Lost Expedition. The mole wandered along Taganskaya-Koltsevaya seemingly aimlessly, looking around as if admiring the stucco figures on the walls. In fact, he was much more interested in the faces of the living than in the bas-reliefs and multicolored marble, than in the faces of the heroes of old, looking down from the walls. But he didn't want to show his interest too obviously and draw unnecessary attention to himself. So he pretended to be interested in the decoration of Taganka, familiar to him down to the smallest detail. And there was something to admire here. The floor, laid with gray and red stone, was scrubbed until it shone. People, mostly well-dressed, were bustling about, as if nothing had happened, as if there had been no Holocaust, as if the last 20 years had not happened, he thought.
It seems that now a train will fly out of the tunnel with a roar and a crash, and people will go about their business, some to work, some home. A shrill whistle indeed sounded from the tunnel. Then a shabby carriage appeared, pulling another one with the top removed, in which passengers, dressed in whatever they could, were sitting on wooden benches. An elderly woman with a knapsack had a colorful skirt sticking out from under her padded jacket, and she had cut galoshes on her feet. A guy in a faded tracksuit sitting next to her was holding a duffel bag tied with tape, a shuttle no doubt. A lady in a fur coat made of an incomprehensible animal in leggings, proudly showing off her legs in almost new sneakers. A status thing in these days, few can afford such a thing, looked at him with disgust. The lady snorted every now and then, wrinkled her nose. Apparently, the guy was not giving off the most pleasant smell.
He stubbornly pretended not to notice, or maybe he really didn't notice. He seemed to be dozing, but he held on tightly to the bag. Then the trolley stopped, and the guy's sleep instantly flew away. He was the first to grab the bag and jump onto the platform. The mole turned away and sighed. It was no longer possible to dream. Of course, it was noticeable that the people at the station were very different from the motley crowd hurrying about their business that poured in and out of the carriages in the old days. Well-dressed people caught your eye even now. People lived richly on the Hansa. But there was a huge difference between then and now. Now, a person was considered well-dressed if his clothes were intact and relatively clean, and he had the opportunity to wash his hair at least once every few days. Water was cherished like the apple of an eye. It was so difficult to get and clean it. People looked at a woman with envy if she had long hair. Not everyone could afford such luxury now. Most people had their hair cut short, partly for sanitary and hygienic reasons, partly for economy. Many of the current inhabitants of the station wore military uniforms of various types, partly because they were the most readily available. Mole chuckled and glanced sideways at his boots. In his previous life, when he was still a boy, he had dressed much worse than he did now. But if he could go back to those days, he would agree without a second thought. It had seemed then that he was missing a lot. Now he understood that he should have appreciated other things: sunlight, greenery, warmth, familiar faces around him. And now he got much better clothes than before, but for some reason his new clothes brought him almost no joy. Ungrateful beast man. He didn't like this and he didn't like that. Probably it could have been much worse. He, too, could have perished on that day, when the world above exploded, when all his loved ones died. But he miraculously survived, although now he himself did not know whether to be happy or sad about it. Two guards in gray Hanseatic camouflage stood frozen near the crossing, a banner hanging above them. A white sheet with a brown circle in the middle, the Hansa flag. In the northern part of the hall, a real hotel complex had been built from multicolored plastic panels. Mole had stayed there before. There were 2-bed and 4-bed cabins, and in the middle the complex was divided by a 2-meter passage. Taganskaya was also famous for its hospital, but Mole, fortunately, had never been there. His wounds were usually stitched up by the first doctor he came across, and they healed on him like on a dog. Mole cast another absent-minded glance at the trolley and became wary. Another familiar face. It was hardly a coincidence. Mole was ready to swear that he had seen this guy somewhere. A thin figure, a narrow face, short cropped light gray hair, a long nose, watery, two close-set eyes, looking as if absent-mindedly. Mole wanted to turn away, but did not have time. The man caught his gaze and nodded in a familiar way, as if to an old acquaintance. It was too late to pretend that he had not noticed, and Mole nodded in response. The man came up to him, held out his hand. Mole squeezed it. Dry, narrow, rough. He squeezed it tightly. The man winced slightly. He was 2 heads taller, and therefore it seemed that he was looking down on his interlocutor, condescendingly. "Hello, so you were signed up for this too?" asked the guy, whose name Mole still couldn't remember. "Maybe so," Mole answered evasively. He felt that there was no point in denying it. His secret mission would soon cease to be a secret. Of course, the man could have meant something completely different. But Mole felt in his gut that there was no mistake. They were here for the same reason. And was it worth hiding it any longer? "Okay, I need to meet someone else here. Let's do it in the dining room tonight," the lanky one suggested, as if he had no doubt that Mole would agree. And Mole nodded. What else could he do? His interlocutor headed for the entrance to the hotel complex. Mole finally remembered him. His own, the Stalker brother. His nickname also popped into his memory. Litvin. Or maybe that was his real last name. Mole even remembered where he had seen him, in Polis, in a state located on the Lenin Library and 3 neighboring stations, where the surviving books and knowledge were stored. The last place, probably, where book wisdom was still valued. Brahmins predominated there. The Guardians, tracing their lineage back to the employees of the Great Library, and the Kshatriyas, the military. The Brahmins had tattoos in the form of a book on their temples, but Litvin had no tattoo. And yet Mole could have sworn that he was well known in Polis, and with this manner of his, looking down on his interlocutors, the lanky man looked very much like a Brahmin. Meanwhile, he asked something of the guard at the entrance to the complex. Mole turned away, and when he looked in that direction again, he noticed a new character. A tall man in a khaki uniform and a cap with a red star, frowning, explaining something to Litvin. Litvin's interlocutor even tore off his cap in the heat of the moment, revealing his bald spots. His rough, as if wind-beaten, red face was wrinkled. Next to the man, a thin, pale creature in a khaki shirt hanging on his shoulders like a hanger. Baggy pants that stayed up only thanks to a belt tightened at the waist, massive boots and a black baseball cap was shuffling around. And here's Pathfinder. Last time he had a different trainee, a short, stocky guy. I wonder where he went. You wouldn't envy the one the Pathfinder would take on as a student. He's terribly boring. The stalker from the Red Line, nicknamed Red Pathfinder, was known to his colleagues as a mischievous and stubborn type. Even the fact that he had taken such a nickname for himself said a lot. On the Red Line, all stalkers were called Red Pathfinders, and this one, apparently, considered himself the reddest of them all. However, right now, Mole was not interested in the Pathfinder's character, which many had already encountered. Mole sensed with his nose, that sixth sense that so often allowed him to escape danger, that something was brewing. He had come across familiar faces here too often today. No, he had seen gatherings here before. Taganskaya-Koltsevaya was a lively place. Sometimes those who proudly called themselves hunters would gather here. They could be seen from afar. It was understandable, because from here, there was a direct road to Proletarka, to the shooting range. Hunters drank, noisily bragged to each other about their gear and trophies. Mole and others like him secretly despised such people. Of course, it was easy to shoot a wounded, exhausted mutant at the shooting range, whom stalkers, risking themselves, had carefully delivered from the surface for you, tied up and humble. But try to grapple with the same mutant up there in the dead city, where he was in his element, and you were wearing chemical protection that restricted your movements and a gas mask that limited your view. Try to defeat him there. Then it would be clear whether you had the right to be called a hunter. Yes, there are probably only a few real hunters for the entire metro, or maybe only one of them truly deserved the right to call himself a hunter. Hunter. Pale woman in camouflage and black gloves with cut-off fingers flashed through the crowd, looking around nervously. Her unevenly cut hair, revealing one ear, completely hid the other. The scar on her face was barely noticeable. Mole thought he smelled something sinister. What did she need here? No, of course, one could assume that all these people had come together precisely here and precisely today, absolutely by chance. But life had taught Mole not to trust random coincidences. Too often there was a pattern behind chance. He sighed, took a tattered piece of paper from his pocket, on which only 2 words were scrawled unevenly in pencil, as if in a hurry. He reread them again, carefully folded the note, and put it back in his pocket. Yes, there are definitely too many of his kind here today. Fortune hunters. Mole was one of those who, after the catastrophe, made forays into the city, which was slowly collapsing on the surface, looking for what could still be useful to the population of the underground. In essence, he took what did not belong to him, but his profession was called by a sonorous word that made girls' hearts stop. Stalker. And people like him enjoyed universal respect among the inhabitants of the underground, because now it was very dangerous to get out to the surface, and what remained there no longer belonged, in fact, to anyone, and gradually deteriorated, fell into disrepair, rusted, and became covered in mold. After the catastrophe, the few survivors lost everything. Apartments in the city became almost as inaccessible and useless for their former owners as, for example, plots of land on Mars. Stalkers searched the ruins for anything that could still be of some use to the remnants of the population. Food, sometimes still good for food, the survivors did not have to be picky. Medicines whose expiration dates had long since expired. Weapons, gas masks, chemical protection. Even cosmetics, so that women could decorate themselves. It was understandably not a cheap pleasure, and not everyone could afford it. Cosmetics were bought only by those who had enough of the universal currency of the metro, cartridges, and therefore, it was easy to judge the coolness of a woman's father or patron by her appearance. More or less well-groomed women lived on Hansa, not like at remote stations where girls blackened their eyebrows with coals and inserted iron rings into their ears. Mole chuckled. Yes, at his home station he was guaranteed the admiring glances of young, snot-nosed girls, and even lonely older women looked at him with secret hope. Most of them would not mind finding a life partner and protector in him. Especially since in the metro, a lonely woman was in fact easy prey for any scoundrel. But Mole was not interested in them, maybe because all their feelings and aspirations were too clearly visible in their eyes at first glance. However, he did not particularly like the well-groomed and bitchy Hanseatic women either. He had to admit, he still had not met the woman of his dreams, although he had had adventures. However, what is his age? For a man of almost 30, life is just beginning. And women here, in the metro, age much earlier than men. From a hard life, bad air, lack of sun. Besides, there is no point in a stalker making plans for the future. His profession is full of surprises. Today he is alive and well, and tomorrow he may well not return from another mission. Probably, it was this circumstance that made women's hearts beat faster, which Mole sometimes took advantage of. And, it would seem, he is far from handsome. His eyes are too close set, and his small black whiskers make him look like an animal, in whose honor he received his nickname. And still, having learned what he does, most women begin to look at him with special attention. It is sometimes pleasant to see an admiring look. You begin to seem much cooler and braver to yourself than you actually are. Although, what can I say, stalkers are also different. They themselves knew each other's worth in their circle, understood who was worth what. There are those, like the legendary hunter, those who were lucky enough to see him, they talk about it with bated breath. He exists as if by himself, sets himself tasks, the scope of which is staggering. He thinks about the fate of the entire metro.
We can't compare to him, thought Mole. We are simple workers, black bones. Although we are also capable of something. Mole had to deal with competitors from time to time. With some, he had normal relations, with others not. But most stalkers knew each other and preferred to solve many problems together. They were allowed through at all stations, no matter what the current relations were between the main metro powers, Hansa, located on the Circle Line on whose territory he was currently located, the Fourth Reich, which occupied Pushkinskaya, Chekhovskaya, and Tverskaya, and the Red Line, headed by the General Secretary, Comrade Moskvin. There were also all sorts of alliances and confederations, but only these states enjoyed real influence. And also, perhaps, Polis was the only place where they still tried to preserve civilization. Sometimes, general meetings of stalkers were even held there, where pressing issues were solved together. However, there were persistent rumors about the legendary Emerald City in the basements of the Moscow State University building, but they had not yet been confirmed. It would be interesting to somehow equip an expedition there, thought Mole. Although this idea had already occurred to someone before him, but not a single expedition had managed to even come close to that place, or even find out whether the main building was still standing or had collapsed long ago. What if he had succeeded? They say that this cat with the scar, one of the few female stalkers, led a detachment there. But they did not reach the legendary high-rise, of course. Of the entire detachment, only one survived, and he told how it happened. And if it were not for Cat, he would not have returned either. True, getting involved with her is more expensive for himself. She is too nervous. Who knows what will hit her in the head? And this person can't stand men either. There are some dark rumors about her, that it's better not to run into her alone in the tunnel. Women have strange logic. It means that when they hire her as a guide, they pay with bullets. She ensures safety, and when she's out on her own, it's better not to get in her way. Although she apparently has reasons to hate people, they say she's not quite human, but a mutant. And she has her own score to settle with the opposite sex. A scar where an extra finger was cut off, a mutilated ear. But you can't put everyone under the same brush, even if some freaks really offended her. Mole was tolerant of mutants. He was rather embarrassed by the fact that a woman was taking on men's work. She's desperate, of course. You can't take that away from her. And still, it's not right for women to go up there with weapons. Sighing, Mole tried to focus on the problems of the day. Well, he thought. It really is an interesting picture. At one station, at one and the same time, stalkers from the Hansa, the Red Line, the Polis, almost all the major powers have gathered. Only someone from the Reich is missing to make things completely happy. But these stalkers from the Reich, as they are called behind their backs on the Red Line, prefer to keep to themselves. Could it really be that someone has dug up something important in the vicinity, and we were all sent on missions to the same place?
Anyone else would not have seen anything suspicious in this coincidence, but Mole was proud of his intuition, which almost never let him down, and it told him that it was no accident that his colleagues were flocking here like rats sensing prey. All this activity was not accidental. Oh, not accidental. True, for now Mole could only guess at the reason for the unusual crowd. Sometimes something like this happened in the metro. Suddenly a rumor would spread that something had been found somewhere that everyone really needed. A map indicating a bunker with weapons, for example, or maybe food or fuel warehouses. Word of mouth spread the rumors, and the powers sent their scouts to check, and stalkers from all over the metro rushed to search, trying to get ahead of each other. Often, however, the rumors turned out to be false, and therefore, in such cases, potential rivals tried to cooperate with each other, at least at first, and then they would see how the trick would fall. Someone tapped Mole on the shoulder. He flinched, turned around instantly, his hand on the handle of his knife. The guy who had so unceremoniously drawn attention to himself was a stranger to him. "What do you want?" the Mole muttered with hostility. "You're not Mole by any chance?" "Well, let's say so what?" Mole frowned, looking at the questioner. The guy's face seemed open, pleasant. A straight nose, thin lips, eyebrows raised, a soulful look. Dark hair cut short. Nothing special, but women usually like that. On the other hand, an ordinary face. No memorable features that could make him stand out from dozens of others. However, maybe it's for the best. He speaks as if he is used to communicating with a wide variety of people, calmly, without nervousness. Very young, apparently just in his 20s, dressed rather in Catastrophe style. The gangsters there prefer to wear sweatpants and leather jackets. However, this does not mean that he is also a bandit, and does not look like a scumbag. And in his eyes, some kind of hidden bitterness. Apparently he managed to get burned already, thought Mole. Then greetings from the boatman, good man, the guy said this, lowering his voice and looking around. The Mole nodded understandingly. If this was the boatman's man, then it was a different matter. The boatman was a legendary figure. He got his nickname because sometimes he had to swim down the Yauza River on whatever he could, from the Elektrozavodskaya station, where he most often stayed, almost to the Moscow River itself, delivering secret cargo and mysterious passengers to Kitaygorod. There were rumors that some forces were behind him. Influential people. Almost a secret organization. That he had a row with Wotan's gang of Vikings. And that he was unusually lucky. At least no one else would risk making such a journey. But the boatman knew the river like the back of his hand. And according to rumors, almost made friends with some of the monsters that lived there. Krot himself didn't like Wotan very much, although they were both from Hansa. Wotan led a group of Hansa rangers, and in Krot's opinion, a gang of either stalkers or bandits who had pompous nicknames and were engaged in catching mutants for the testing ground on Proletarskaya. According to rumors, they paid more than decently for this. But many stalkers were squeamish about taking on such work. "Well, I know the boatman," agreed the Mole. "What's your name?" "Fedor," the guy answered quietly after a slight pause, as if he was unsure whether he should give his real name. "And what do you want from me?" asked the Mole, rightly judging that the greeting was only an introduction to the main conversation. "I heard that you were going beyond Proletarka, towards Textile. So I thought that it would be more fun together." Mole chuckled. "Another one. This one's going there too." It was useless to find out where the boatman got this information from. It seemed that the boatman knew where Mole intended to go before Mole did. I wonder what had suddenly turned up in those God-forsaken lands that even this old man, whom death itself had not taken, had decided to send his man there to scout it out. Apparently, Mole's intuition had not deceived him. Everyone desperately needed to get to Textile today. "I haven't seen you before," he said to the guy. "How long have you been going up there?" "No, recently," he sighed. "What are you going to look for there, behind Proletarka?" Krot didn't expect an answer. He asked just in case. There was no answer. The guy shrugged his shoulders. "The boatman told me. Look there, ask around. He said that this would be your task. He said that I didn't have to go up there myself. I could just find out what they found there and tell him later. You'll have to go up anyway. There's an open stretch from Volgogradka to Textile," sighed Krot. In principle, he rather liked the guy. His sixth sense told him that he wouldn't be a burden. But that absent-minded look bothered him, as if he was saying one thing, but thinking about something of his own, hidden. Some worries were gnawing at him. Maybe unrequited love. Who knows? It's a young thing, and a real stalker must, when necessary, forget everything personal and concentrate on what's happening around him. Otherwise, his life will be short. "Have you known the boatman for a long time?" asked the mole. About a month and a half," the guy answered after a pause. Mole sighed. What was Boatman thinking about? This wasn't a pleasure trip to send a newbie. He'd heard that the open section between Volgogradka and Textile was short, but very dangerous. Some mutants had appeared there, and no one had been going that way for a long time. However, Boatman had nothing to be sad about. If one assistant died, he'd find another. Maybe he wanted to test his guy in a serious matter. By the way, the guy only gave his name. Mole didn't really need his last name, especially since it could have been fictitious. But almost every stalker has a nickname, which often characterizes him better than any ID. "What's your nickname?" asked Mole. "What do you mean?" The guy didn't understand. "Well, what do your people call you?" Ah, the guy realized. That's his name. Fedya. By name. And again, he looked away.
Mole sighed.
So the guy really was still very green. He hadn't even earned a nickname yet. He'd die like that, and you wouldn't know how to remember him.
And anyway,
It was unclear why he'd taken on such a job. Well, his appearance didn't fit with Mole's idea of a typical stalker. The guy would look more like some clerk from Hansa, if you dressed him up a little more decently. No, of course, every stalker was once a rookie. No one becomes a seasoned scout right away. However, rookies are usually distinguished by passion, a sparkle in their eyes, a desire to quickly prove themselves in action. But this one was kind of sluggish. Neither fish nor fowl. How would he show himself in dangerous conditions? I've never been there, beyond Volgogradka.
and I've never been to Proletarka either.
Fyodor admitted sheepishly. I haven't been there either since the Holocaust, muttered Mole. Well, let's go together. Perhaps we can come to an agreement. But it seems to me that we are not the only ones going there. I saw some of our brothers here. We should test the waters. Where are you staying? The question was rather rhetorical. The young man nodded towards the hotel complex. Then come to the canteen in the evening, said Mole. I've already arranged a meeting with someone there. Entering his room, Mole stretched out on a narrow bed covered with a worn but relatively clean flannel blanket. He felt sad. Somewhere in the direction they were about to go lay his home district. He had been born and raised there before the catastrophe. It seemed he was the only one of his family to survive, because that was the day he was going to visit his grandfather downtown. And although the catastrophe had opened up new opportunities for him, He had encountered smart people he would never have known in his previous life. Krot would have given anything to turn back time. He had never tried to go beyond Proletarka before. Too much had been associated with those places before, and it was too painful to think about what was going on there. Now. And there was nothing to do in those parts. It was much more interesting and profitable to walk around the center. The houses there were crowded, and sometimes there was a lot of useful stuff in the apartments. And the closer to his home district, the more often he encountered industrial zones. Wastelands where there was nothing to catch. If there was anything in abundance there, it was mutants, perhaps. However, now he must return there. That was the assignment he had been given. He could, of course, have refused, but he did not. When the stalker looked into the dining room closer to evening, everyone was already there. Fyodor was sitting at a separate table, sipping home brew and thoughtfully picking at a plate with slightly burnt pork shashlik. The guy is no fool when it comes to food, Mole noted to himself. 3 people had settled down in the corner not far from him. Litvin, Pathfinder, and a thin creature in a protective-colored suit and a baseball cap pulled down over his eyes. Pathfinder was furiously explaining something to Litvin, who was listening, wincing from time to time in annoyance. It would seem that this thin, pale man also did not look much like a hunter, but it was felt that he was perfectly aware of who he was and where he was and what he wanted from life. He was like a tightly stretched string. Mole took a couple of flatbreads, a portion of mushrooms, and a mug of homebrew, and approached the animatedly chatting company. "How are you?" he asked. Litvin silently gave a thumbs up. The tracker shrugged his shoulders vaguely. Mole glanced cautiously at the creature in the baseball cap. At first glance, one could decide that it was a skinny lad. Had the Reds' plans changed at the last moment and sent someone else? Mole took a closer look. Wrists that were too thin were sticking out of sleeves that were too large, eyelashes that were too long, smooth movements. So it was a girl after all, the scouts had reported correctly. She sat, modestly looking down, but sipping her mead. The Reds' plates contained charred, twisted rat carcasses. "You cheapskate could have fed the girl better. She was pale almost to the point of green. She wouldn't last long like this. She's not spoiled, apparently. Look how she's attacking the rat. She's almost gnawed it clean," Mole thought, and sighed. On the eternally hungry Red Line, they tried to save on everything. "Comrade Moskvin doesn't pay you well," he sympathized with Pathfinder. "Not even enough for shashlik." "Do you want to talk about it?" Pathfinder tensed. "Well, that's enough." Mole extended his hand conciliatorily. "Let's have a drink and get down to business." He raised his mug and said solemnly, "Well, for those who go to the surface tonight, may they have luck. May they not fall into the mutant's teeth. May they return with prey. It would have been a sin not to drink to this." The toast united everyone sitting there, and even Pathfinder seemed to soften. "Fedor," called Mole, "come to us." The Pathfinder frowned. "This is also our man. I know him," Mole reassured him, without specifying how long ago they had met. "Now for those who went into the tunnels and never came back," said Litvin, who also knew the traditions. Everyone drank in silence. It was proper to drink to those who had left with one's head uncovered, but the girl did not take off her baseball cap. "He's hiding it." "That's right," thought Mole. "Surely neither Litvin nor Fedya suspect anything. They think it's a guy. Well, let them think that for a while." Seeing that the girl was sad over the remains of the rat, he moved one of his flatbreads closer to her as if by accident, carefully driving away the assumption that they were baked here from sawdust. The girl, stretching out a skinny hand covered in chapped, scratched and burred, with not very clean nails, quickly grabbed the treat and cast a grateful glance at the stalker. Her eyes turned out to be brown, and her face was covered in red freckles. She lowered her head and bit into the pancake. Her boss seemed not to notice, and Mole congratulated himself on a successful start. The girl was his assignment. He had to keep an eye on her, and at the same time, get a good look at what she was like. It wouldn't hurt to make friends with her to make his job easier. The Reds are heading to Kuzminki, his superiors told him. We need to find out why. There are rumors that something interesting was discovered in the forest park there. Your task is to verify this information, and at the same time, take a closer look at the girl who is going with them. She could be useful. Meanwhile, the toasts helped everyone get into the right mood. Those sitting at the table realized that they were part of a single stalker brotherhood. Now they could talk about business. I'm glad we're all here, said Mole, almost truthfully. And I think we've got a lot to discuss. Looks like we're on the same path? Not a fact, said the mischievous Pathfinder. If I understand correctly, Mole insisted, the road ahead will be difficult, and it's better for us all to be together. Litvin nodded. Fyodor also chuckled in agreement. The girls are dancing interestingly. Let's find out first, said Pathfinder. Otherwise, maybe we'll all go in different directions. The Red Line stalkers don't like to show up on Hansa. You can only meet them here if they have business in these parts, Mole noted. Since you started the conversation, why don't you show your cards first? Pathfinder asked. Okay, sighed the Mole. What if I say that I'll go from here towards Prolatarka? It's warm, Pathfinder nodded, as if in a child's game. But you know me, continued Mole. I'm not one of those who catch mutants for profit, so there's nothing for me to do on Prolatarka, on the training ground. And I'll go further, to Volgogradka. Even warmer, said Pathfinder. Well, and there is nothing to do. There are only enclosures, and that means my path is even further to the surface. Beyond Volgogradka, as everyone knows, there is an open section. Litvin nodded. And then there are 3 stations, Tekstilshchiki, Kuzminki, Ryazansky Prospect. Then there is another open section, Vikino Station, on the surface. And there, it seems, some other unfinished stations. But that is closer to Lubertsi. As far as I know, no one has ever gone to those parts, and I have nothing to do there. So, it turns out, he paused, that I need to go to Textile. It's quite warm, said Pathfinder. Fyodor froze, all attention. Well, if that's the case, said Mole, maybe we should join forces. The place is out of the way. Who lives there? How they greet guests? We don't know. I heard that they live in Textile, but I've never been there, Litvin nodded. In general, whether there is life beyond Volgogradka or not, science knows nothing about this. Okay, you said A, now say B. Pathfinder slammed his aluminum mug on the sticky table. You weren't planning on stopping at textiles, were you? You're right, agreed the Mole. I was going to go further. And after a pause, he added, to Kuzminki. It's hot, said Pathfinder. Very hot. I thought so. I wasn't mistaken, Mole said thoughtfully. And it also seems to me that we weren't the only ones who got the tip there. I saw someone else from our tribe here, a famous person. Could it really be Hunter? Pathfinder suggested ironically, but with a grain of doubt. You're dreaming, Mole chuckled. Where are we? And where is Hunter? Maybe Wotan? Wotan and his gang of northern gods have not yet been found here, although perhaps we will meet his gang on Prolatarka. No, I saw one beauty with a scar, whose name is better not to mention without need. The stalkers exchanged meaningful glances. By the way, I don't see copper iron, Mole turned to Pathfinder. The ranger grimaced. Iron was his lucky rival, a thorn in his side. You know him? He does everything his own way. He was sent with us too, but apparently he got lost on the way. We missed each other. By the way, has anyone here come across this chatterbox, Safronenko? Litvin chuckled quietly but distinctly. Mole shrugged. The only thing missing here was Safronenko. The mission was supposedly secret, although a little more and it would cease to be a secret for colleagues. But that was only half the trouble. But Safronenko's presence here would mean that secrecy could be completely forgotten. All their plans would immediately become known to the entire metro. If Safronenko were here, I wouldn't give an empty cartridge case for keeping everything a secret, he said, but I haven't seen his face here today. The Pathfinder breathed a sigh of relief. And yet, he asked, so we came, for example, to Kuzminki, and then, what? What are you going to look for there? The same as you, said Mole evasively. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, Litvin said thoughtfully. To begin with, it's a blank spot on the map. People seem to live there, but what and how, we don't really know. For example, I was asked to find out what and how in order to fill this gap. And there's something else that interests me there, but more on that later. Well, maybe we'll come to an agreement by tomorrow, Mole said approvingly. Well, I'll tell you too. They gave me a tip about the park. The Pathfinder nodded, confirming that he too was going to those parts. What did they tell us to look for? Mole asked quietly. But Pathfinder shrugged decisively, showing that he did not intend to get into the discussion now. Fyodor also made an innocent face, and the girl sitting next to Pathfinder became almost invisible. But Mole got the impression that someone knew what all this was for, and was silent. Okay, we'll find out later, he thought. So, that's what we'll decide on, to join forces. We still need to figure out what to say to the local authorities if we suddenly show up there as a crowd. Otherwise, it will look suspicious. Even if we show up there one by one, it will also look suspicious. They probably have remote places. Every new person is in plain sight. Moreover, I heard that almost no one goes there from the big metro now, Litvin said. I agree, muttered Mole, but it's easier to kill us individually. Does anyone have a map? Pathfinder asked. I have one, said the Mole, but it's old. He carefully spread the tattered map, sealed in plastic, on the table, making sure not to fall into the puddle of mash. Be careful, don't get it dirty, he muttered to Pathfinder, since Comrade Moskvin doesn't supply you with maps. I have a metro map, Pathfinder said, offended. And what is your scheme to us? Here I can see everything. An open area beyond Volgogradka, then Tekstilshiki, Kuzminki, Ryazansky Prospect. Textile workers? Fyodor asked again. What are these, mutants? Actually, this is a station. Why? No, nothing. The guy was embarrassed. It's just that the mutants who live near Elektrozavodskaya have a similar name. Haven't heard of them? Spinners? I've heard about anglers, Litvin shook his head. Let's not get distracted, said Mole. I think textile workers are the ones who make clothes, but I'm not sure. He bent over the map again, continuing to mutter under his breath. Ryazansky is marked as inhabited. What about Tekstil and Kuzminki? Pathfinder intervened. They live there too. I don't know. Nothing is written here. Then what's the point of your card? I told you. The old map. Krot got angry. The new one costs more. Let's go there ourselves. I'll make a mark with my own hand. Maybe these are already abandoned stations. Although, if you believe the people, I've already talked to some people here. There are people there, but they almost never go to the big metro, and they themselves are not particularly happy to have guests. Ryazanka is definitely inhabited. And then again, an open section. A radiation threat icon. So what? Pathfinder quipped immediately. Even without a map, any fool will tell you that there's a radiation threat on the surface. Vikino is marked as abandoned. Nothing surprising, it's above ground, Mole continued, not paying attention to him, running a dirty fingernail along the plastic film. And then, Lermontovsky Prospect, Julebino. It seems they didn't even have time to finish them. But that doesn't matter to us anymore. They seem to have almost finished building them. They just haven't had time to open them.
Maybe there are people there too, said Pathfinder. That's not what we're talking about now, Mole muttered. In general, let's agree on when we leave, Litvin suggested. We have 2 stages to Volgogradka, and from there, another stage to Tekstil, the most difficult one. The open section, it seems, is not even a kilometer, but it will be the hardest to pass.
I think if we leave after breakfast, we will have time to rest on Volgogradka before heading to the surface in the evening. If no one is afraid of the noise and stench, there are enclosures there. Aren't the tunnels here dangerous? Fyodor asked. I don't think so. Only on Proletarka and Volgogradka. Around that training ground and the enclosures there are a lot of riffraff hanging around. It's unpleasant to walk there alone, but I don't think they'll do anything to a group. Coming, said Pathfinder. Then we all need to be here for breakfast. Let's go, he said to his companion and headed for the exit. Litvin followed them. So, do you understand everything? Mole asked Fyodor. Do you have any equipment? Chemical protection? A muzzle? Yes, I got ready properly, nodded Fyodor. Well, that's great. Be careful not to oversleep. We won't have to wait long for anyone. Yes, thought Mole, returning to his room. What a hike we've got planned. 2 out of 5 are newbies. I wonder if we'll even be able to get to the right station without losses. He had heard stories about similar expeditions. To the Emerald City, for example. Sometimes a group of 5 people would set out, and only one would return. Sometimes no one would return at all. They would disappear without a trace. In the morning, when he came down for breakfast, Mole found Pathfinder and the girl, whose face was still hidden by the peak of her baseball cap, warming themselves with mushroom tea. Soon, Fyodor showed up, and last to arrive was Litvin, with a swollen and rumpled face. Well, the audibility in the rooms is great, he muttered instead of explaining. The neighbors kept me awake half the night. He quickly poured himself a portion of mushroom tea, wincing in pain, and immediately jumped up. Well, shall we go? Let's sit down for the road, said Mole. Litvin winced again, but sat back down on the plastic chair, and Pathfinder and Fyodor obeyed willingly. Apparently, they also respected this sign. Looking at them, the girl sat down too. This custom was not the strangest. Most stalkers had their own methods, sometimes very strange. Spells, amulets, rituals to attract luck. When death lies in wait at every step, you inevitably become superstitious. The stalkers walked past the important border guards, in gray Hanseatic camouflage, onto Taganskaya-Koltsevaya, which was much less formal and much worse lit. There were no chandeliers or stucco here, the only decoration being parallel brown stripes on thick white pylons at about human height. The long station hall with a round smoked vault was lined with rows of tents. Mole noted that Fyodor glanced around the station without much surprise, as if he had already been there more than once. But Pathfinder's companion nearly broke her neck looking around, as if she had found herself outside the red line for the first time. Mole smiled indulgently. Soon, having passed another checkpoint, the stalkers went deeper into the tunnel. At Proletarskaya, Krot's mood immediately soured. The station, with its peeling concrete walls on which traces of bullets were visible, and the floor in brown stains smelled of blood and death. In the middle of the platform, steps went up, a transition to another station. I think it was Catastrophe, Krot remembered. Some columns served as supports for wide, 2-tiered platforms intended for hunters. They were prudently protected by large mesh netting, and in some places, by barbed wire. During the hunt, the shooters could feel safe and calmly choose a suitable target among the mutants rushing around the hall.
Fun for the rich, Krot spat at his feet.
He did not consider it shameful to take the life of a creature in self-defense, but he would never kill for no reason. Try to defeat a monster in its native element. In a fair fight, one-on-one, then glory and praise to you. But killing creatures like cattle in a slaughterhouse is disgusting. Such fun is not for real men. That's why Mole didn't like Wotan, who with his gang caught mutants for this cruel fun. And although it would seem Mole should have hated the hunters themselves, the customers, he didn't think about it. What can you expect from them, the wretched ones? That's how you could translate his thoughts. But he was disgusted by Wotan, who took on any foul-smelling job for a bribe. Although, if you think about it, Wotan and his huntsmen got the hardest job, the catching. However, Mole tried not to show his attitude, although it seemed to him that Wotan guessed, but only chuckled to himself.
The mole looked around the squad. Litvin was looking at the poorly washed blood on the floor, the bullet holes on the walls. The servants he met with such disgust, as if he had accidentally ended up in a pig pen. The Pathfinder was gloomily surveying the station, clearly not approving of what was happening here either. Fyodor did not look particularly surprised, but his face clearly showed a desire to leave this unpleasant place as soon as possible. The girl turned almost green. "Look, remember, gather impressions," muttered the mole. She wanted to answer something, but involuntarily put her hand to her mouth as if she was sick. Along the bare concrete walls riddled with bullets, strange individuals in military uniforms, apparently related to the testing ground, were wandering around, examining something, quietly talking. Wotan was not among them, but the stalkers did meet a familiar face. The plump man who was talking to someone turned around and broke into a smile. "Holy mother, who do I see? What people! And without security! Mole! Tramp! Is that you?" "Hello, Wooden!" Mole shouted with sincere joy. His soul felt lighter. If such a lucky stalker was with them, then the devil himself was no friend to them. A successful hunter, a cynic, and a drunkard, Iron Copper was the pride of the Red Line and at the same time its shame, in the opinion of Comrade Moskvin. They had not touched him yet only because there were only a few smart stalkers anyway. He behaved accordingly, allowing himself various antics. Mole knew that Copper was supposed to accompany Pathfinder, but apparently he did not like this assignment, and he could not refuse, but he preferred to wait for his partner here and not at Taganka, so that he could at least slightly fray his nerves in revenge. "Great!" They embraced, slapped each other on the shoulders for a long time, shook each other's hands. But Mole felt an inexplicable sympathy for this man, just as he felt antipathy for Pathfinder. It would seem that Iron should have irritated him with his appearance and behavior, but Mole felt something deep, real in him. People like him were said to say, "I would go up with him." The others waited patiently for the stormy greetings to end. The most interesting thing was that Iron seemed not to notice Pathfinder and his companion, and Pathfinder had a face as if he had drunk sour. Mole decided that they had managed to get on each other's nerves back home, especially since Iron's appearance was rather peculiar, and for the Red Line, even more so. He wore a shabby leather jacket, apparently made before the Catastrophe, wide trousers and pointed boots with numerous rivets. Numerous metal rings stuck out of his ears and nose. He gathered his half-gray hair into a ponytail at the back of his head with an elastic band. His arms, back, and chest were decorated with numerous tattoos. "And what brings you here?" Iron asked, lowering his voice. "What brought you together with this idiot? With this half-baked Chingachgook?"
who clearly didn't play enough Indians as a child. And he glanced sideways at Pathfinder with hostility. Actually, I noticed you back at Taganka. I thought, wow, all these familiar faces. And why are you all gathered as if on cue? Are they burying a brownie or marrying off a witch? What? Mole was surprised. Forget it. Iron waved his hand. Mole nodded. Iron was known as an educated man and often spoke incomprehensibly. He decided that he could not hide the task from Iron. Maybe he himself would hear something. We all received a tip about the same place, he explained. Let me guess. Iron turned serious. Isn't it on Kuzminki? How do you know? You too? That's right, Iron chuckled. Well, I thought I'd calmly scout out the situation, but since you're all heading there, it makes sense to join forces so as not to cross paths and bump heads. Although I wouldn't have gone with that weirdo who imagines himself a great hunter, let alone on a reconnaissance mission. I wouldn't have even sat down in the field next to you if it weren't for you. But there's another thing. How do we know how they'll treat aliens from the big metro? What's going on there anyway? The stations are on the outskirts. Maybe there's a lot of scum there who need to hide for a while and lie low. It's better to stick together in places like that. This is a strange place. 3 stations turned out to be cut off from the rest of the metro. I don't know this line very well, but even before the Holocaust, I had the misfortune of finding myself at Vikino during rush hour a couple of times. My God. They almost tore me to shreds. There was a railway station nearby, and tons of people were pouring out of there into the subway. But that was a thing of the past, as they say. He became gloomy. We'll have fun, thought Mole. It's hard for stalkers from the same line to get along so well. Maybe they had a disagreement about something back in the day. But it was not worth refusing such a comrade, and Mole nodded. With you, I think things will go well. And what are we going to look for there, do you know? Iron became gloomy. The management is being opaque about something. As far as I understand, they are talking about some kind of bunker. Where is there a bunker in the park? Who knows, Mole responded philosophically. Our business is small. Do you know if Wotan and his team are going to join us? No, Iron shook his head. They say there's already plenty of work, but I think they'd rush there in a heartbeat if the job was sure and profitable. But as it is, go there, I don't know where, bring that, I don't know what. That's what I think too. After gossiping about their colleagues a little more, they returned to the others.
Let's go. I know someone here,
Suggested Iron.
Let's have a bite to eat before the road. It's still too early to go up.
He led the others to the fire, near which sat a gloomy man in a dirty blue padded jacket and tattered trousers, stirring the coals with a stick every now and then. A pot hung over the fire. Iron suggested that everyone get mugs and began pouring thin mushroom tea. The man paid no attention to this. He glanced at them with an indifferent look and turned away again.
They killed Zivchik,
He said suddenly in a hoarse voice. The stalkers stared at him in amazement. Iron nodded sympathetically.
Yes, I feel sorry for him. You have a nasty job, Misha.
Who was he bothering Zivchik? When they opened the cage, he thought they were going to feed him. He wanted to play. He was kind. And they were shooting at him with machine guns. And they were cackling.
Hey, Misha, you need to get out of here, said Iron. The man looked at him in confusion and again stared into the fire. Well, let's talk about the hike, Iron said. Mole pointed at Misha, but Copper just shrugged. You can talk in front of him. He is not interested in our affairs. In general, that's it. We don't know what's going on in Textile and what we might encounter there. They say a stalker came from there not long ago. Well, that is about a couple of years ago, as I understand it. And, in general, he didn't make us happy. According to him, such things were happening up there that he barely escaped, barely alive. He dragged himself into the metro. It took a long time to pump him out, bring him back to his senses. Everyone probably knows that after Volgogradka, there is an open section. Well, that's not so bad. They say there is some kind of crap with the light in the tunnel. Is there no lighting? If only it weren't there. It's there somehow, on its own. Alive and harmful. A nightmare in general. What nonsense. I'm explaining it the way I was told. Iron frowned. But I think we'll all get through it together somehow. Of course it's an anomaly, Pathfinder sighed conciliatorily. It's okay. We'll get through it. Maybe it's just shorting out, Litvin suggested condescendingly. Everyone looked at him doubtfully. This version seemed too simple. They also say that the Herm is broken near the exit to the open tunnel. There used to be a Herm and a post there. And the stalker who passed by there said that the Herm is broken, only horns and legs remain from the post. And, apparently, quite a long time ago. And mutants now live along the open section, where the automobile plant used to be. It's clear, there are mutants everywhere at the top. No, these are downright creepy. I know, Litvin suddenly intervened. There used to be a Lenin-Komsomol automobile plant there. It produced Moskvich cars until about the 90s of the last century. Then in the early 2000s it went bankrupt. The building was bought by the French, and they started producing their Renault cars. Wow, Mole said respectfully, amazed by such meticulousness. He himself had once seen a long, multicolored building with incomprehensible letters on the facade from a speeding subway car, and knew that the company was related to the automobile industry. But he was amazed that even today, someone could tell such details, which seemed to be of no interest to anyone. Yeah, cars. Mole had once envied their owners and promised himself that when he grew up, he would acquire his own shiny and fast beauty. And now there they are, rusting up there. No use to anyone. Take your pick. Mole even kept a couple of them in a cache for himself, just in case. But he rarely used them. The roads up there had fallen into disrepair, were littered with debris from buildings, dug up by tree roots, and it was rare to be able to drive freely. I love history, especially the history of Moscow, Litvin explained with dignity. By the way, this is not such useless knowledge as it seems at first glance, and I have also heard about these mutants. They are called beauties here. I think they are like the mutants from the Filovskaya line. I mean, they are also former people. It is always more difficult with such people. They are more unpredictable, and also embittered. Kiss me, beauty. Iron purred flippantly. The ranger looked at him disapprovingly. What, you didn't watch this movie before the Holocaust? They always showed it on March 8th, about Hollywood Cinderella. And Iron sang something frivolous but incomprehensible. Mole only made out, yeah. I'll see how you sing when we meet the beauties, Pathfinder quipped. Fedor became interested. Amazons, perhaps. I've heard of Amazons. If only. Amazons are the same women, and these, he says they are all tangled up, twisted, muscles like ropes. But their faces are beautiful, until you get close. And their teeth, my mother. The way they open their mouths, it's scary. And most importantly, they are fast, agile. They've adapted, apparently. An ordinary person has no chance against such a thing. How did that stalker get through? He was surprised himself. He says the moon had an effect on them. They were in a trance, didn't react to anything. That's how he slipped through. He wouldn't have gone there without extreme necessity. He desperately needed some rare medicine for his wife. The moon, Mole scratched his head. Who knows? How long until the full moon? No, it's better not to hope for that. Maybe these beauties hibernate during the full moon, but the rest of the evil spirits, on the contrary, wake up.
Oh,
Okay, let's try to get along with the beauties. I've managed it before.
The mole looked back, saw horror on the freckled face of the girl in the baseball cap, and winked at her encouragingly. The guards at the exit from Proletarskaya were playing cards, sitting on a sack filled with cement. It smelled of homebrew. They looked at the stalkers as if they were crazy. "What's wrong with you guys? Go back before it's too late." "And what? It's better not to go there. The electricity there is bad."
Is there no light? It's okay, we have flashlights with us.
"No, it's harmful. It burns out your brain."
But there are cages there. That means someone goes there.
Mole nodded at a man in a quilted jacket who was scurrying around nearby.
So what will happen to these? They have nothing to burn.
The patrolman chuckled. "Well, we'll manage somehow," Iron reassured him. The patrolman looked at him doubtfully. "It's your business, but I warn you." He hiccuped, pulled a flask from his bosom and took a sip. The smell of homebrew became even stronger. Catching Mole's glance, he nodded. "This is the only way we treat ourselves. Our work is harmful. And by the way, I advise you to do the same." The mole shook his head. "Okay, go ahead, sufferers," the patrolman muttered, softened. "If anything happens, we'll remember you." Yes, there was still a post somewhere in the tunnel. When you get there, don't be scared. The guys are still lying there. It's not humane, of course, he sighed, saddened. We should bury them properly. After such a farewell, everyone somehow became quiet. There really was no light in the tunnel. Only a lonely light bulb flickered somewhere ahead. Mole, who was walking ahead, suddenly felt an unreasonable melancholy. Maybe he really should not have signed up for all this. He would have had enough to live on. However, it was not only about the earnings. Each task promised something new, unknown, made the blood run faster through the veins. That's why he loved his job. But it was really hard to breathe here, and there were some debris lying around. Moel shone his torch. There were spots of dried blood on the sleepers. Rags. Something white was showing from under them. Someone had fought here to the death. The light ahead, having flared up for the last time, went out, and there was complete darkness. And in this darkness the only sound was someone's noisy breathing. If Mole hadn't known that it was Iron, he would have decided that some animal had picked up their trail. "Yes, it's not a paradise," Litvin said from behind. And the sounds of the human voice immediately made Moel feel better. "Let's go quickly," he muttered. The light bulb suddenly flashed again, as if someone had suddenly decided to turn on the light. And everyone froze, looking around. Another one lit up behind them. Now, the squad was in sight. It seemed as if someone's attentive eyes were studying the stalkers. "Hey! Whoever's here! Come out!" Mole called out, just in case. Silence. But the light ahead began to blink, as if trying to convey some message. Mole had heard that there was an alphabet of light signals, or sound signals. Who could figure it out? But for some reason it seemed to him that it was better not to delve into the meaning of this message. If there was any meaning in this message from nowhere. The stalker diligently drove away thoughts about ghosts living in the tunnel and trying to tell something to the living. "Well, what are we standing there for? Who are we waiting for?" he muttered, deliberately rudely. "Shall we go?" And the detachment set off. At first, they walked slowly, looking around at every step. But gradually, they grew bolder and quickened their pace. Volgogradsky Prospect announced its approach with an incredible stench. But the stalkers immediately cheered up. There was probably someone on duty near the enclosure with whom they could exchange a word. Well, if it was a light anomaly, then I don't understand why everyone is so scared, Litvin said self-confidently, having perked up. Don't talk about it, Iron said sullenly. It's too early to rejoice, Mole supported him. People won't chatter for nothing. We got through it normally, and that's good. They climbed up to the station, on both sides of which stretched rows of huge cages covered with wire mesh. Fortunately, most of the cages were empty. The inhabitants of the others were either sleeping, curled up and buried in a stinking bed of sawdust, or lay apathetically, not paying attention to people. Mole remembered the stigmata with a muzzle resembling a skull. It generally looked like a caricature of a man. The mutant methodically circled the cage on all fours, and when he saw passers-by, he froze and gave them an unpleasant look. "Well, what are you standing there for?" A man in a padded jacket with torn sleeves and thick pants, who had appeared out of nowhere, raged at them. "Now you'll stir up all the animals. They'll smell the human scent and start to worry." "Hey man, do you have a beauty here? I'd like to at least see what she's like." "Look at what you wanted. All the beauty stayed at Taganka. Here they're only beasts." It seemed to the mole that the stigmata smiled. In the next cage sat a huge dog, watching the stalkers with an almost human gaze, full of mortal melancholy. This gaze made Mole feel uneasy. Meeting his eyes, the dog suddenly raised its head and howled. "Ah, damn you!" The attendant swung at him. But it was too late. The howl was picked up by other inhabitants of the cages, and something unimaginable began around. Some mutants threw themselves at the bars, some creature pulled its bony paws through the bars and tried to hook passers-by. The stalkers quickened their pace. The girl suddenly grabbed Mole by the hand. He nodded encouragingly to her. They had almost entered the tunnel, but the girl was still shaking. "Let's agree on the order in which we'll go," suggested Mole. In the end, he was again the first. Iron was the last, and Pathfinder and both newcomers were placed in the middle. Near the last post, we talked with the guards, who twirled their fingers at their temples, assuring us that no human had set foot here for several years. "Well, you guys are completely sick in the head. There are will-o'-the-wisps there. You found a place to stick your nose in. At least write down the names. Who will we remember later?" "You won't get it," muttered Mole. There was another Herm closer to the exit of the tunnel, the guard commander said, becoming serious. "If you get to that place, take a look at what's there, and how. It's clear that no one is left alive, but at least you can take something as a keepsake for your family. Or maybe the guys left a note." The mole tried to drive away the bad feelings. "Everyone, let's get dressed. There's an open stretch ahead," he said, trying not to look at the pale faces of the newcomers. It seemed they were beginning to realize that the walk would not be entertaining. Chapter 2. Ghost Light. The hermetic gates of Volgogradsky Prospect slammed shut behind them, cutting off their way back. The stalkers, already dressed in chemical protection and gas masks, stood in silence, looking around. It was dark and quiet. A pebble rolled with a thud. A rat or something ran by. The sound was not scary. It was familiar. If there was someone bigger hiding here, they would have made more noise. Mole tried to calm himself. Pathfinder took a step forward, then another, then a third. "Here it is," he blurted out. A faint glimmer of light ran along the wall, creating shadows that seemed to take on a life of their own. Then darkness, and the light flashed again.
"It's just the wiring that's acting up,"
Litvin said in an unnatural voice from under his mask. "Uh-huh," Copper agreed too quickly. The Pathfinder's companion was silent. Either she was speechless with fear or, On the contrary, she did not understand anything. These flashes were even beautiful, and Mole admired them for a few seconds and then suddenly realized that he did not want to go further. He had to make an effort to remember why he was here at all. He moved forward, but each step was difficult, as if he had to overcome the resistance of the suddenly dense, thickened air. He was drawn to lie down and rest. Something strange was happening to his memory. Recent impressions were completely forgotten, but some vague memories of childhood surfaced, seeming sweet and bright from such a distance, like candy wrappers.
It seemed that someone who turned the light on and off was examining these trinkets along with him, and then discarded them as unnecessary, and they disappeared forever in the cold darkness. A children's party in the park, a car ride with Kolka and his parents, a foray into Arbat secretly from his mother. There were not so many of these colorful pieces in the mosaic of his childhood. And now, someone was trying to take everything for themselves. And what would be left for them? A strange apathy was coming over them. Why resist? Let them take it. And it was as if he was gradually sinking into darkness. A little more, and he himself would not remain in this world. So here it was, the anomaly, and in the tunnel between Proletarka and Volgogradka, there were simply interruptions in the light. Now he understood that. But someone had passed through here, so they could too? Forward, Pathfinder ordered in a furious whisper, and took the first step, followed by the girl.
Iron drew some kind of sign in the air and also rushed into the darkness. Holding onto the wall, Fyodor stubbornly, albeit slowly, moved his legs. Litvin suddenly fell to his knees. Mole, coming to his senses, reached him with difficulty and helped him up. A hissing sound was heard from the side. Mole turned around. The light bulb hanging on a frayed wire was flickering weakly. In its flashes, he again seemed to sense signals. A warning. A prediction? "You will die," he seemed to make out in the otherworldly sounds. Mole followed the wire with his gaze and was not at all surprised when it suddenly broke. The light bulb seemed to exist on its own. It was mesmerizing, beckoning. Mole absent-mindedly watched the shadows intertwining in a strange dance. Time slowed down, became viscous, drawn out, and finally stopped altogether. Iron looked back. Apparently, he also felt something. Mole made an effort, reached for his weapon, wanted to end the delusion, shoot the damn lamp. But he got scared. Who knows what forces might wake up, and the local mutants might be interested. Although they should, in theory, be afraid of the light, they could also get used to it. His hand filled with leaden weight and fell limply, and then Mole felt a vacuum forming in him. A black emptiness seemed to suck him out, trying to dissolve him in itself. Damned shadows swirled before his eyes, preventing him from concentrating. "Mom?" Someone's weak voice said very close, and Mole tried to remember his mother, but her face seemed to melt in the fog. The Mole weakly resisted the blackness, feeling that he was gradually giving into it, surrendering. Any minute now, it would swallow him up, digest him. Someone was desperately cursing nearby. Mole tried to find some good reasons to resist, to strive to survive, but he couldn't find any. His mother was long gone. He was alone. He didn't owe anything to anyone, and wasn't responsible for anyone. And no one needed him. The darkness whispered how sweet it was to give in to sleep and sleep. Sleep. There was nothing left anyway. Only a handful of survivors still occasionally disturbed the silence of the tunnels. But not for long. They would soon disappear too, and only the howling of mutants and the noise of the wind would be heard here. Wind. Where was the wind coming from? In the tunnel. This thought seemed sensible. But the stalker didn't have time to finish it. It instantly slipped away. Mole realized that he was disappearing. He searched his memory for at least some recollection that he could cling to, but he couldn't find it. Everything was painted gray. And suddenly, a flame seemed to flare up before his eyes. He saw red hair, a thin, pale face, a fluttering dress, and a saving anger began to flare up in his soul.
He would not give in so easily. He would not let himself be lured into the darkness. Mole looked around. Nearby, Iron was spreading his arms, as if trying to catch someone invisible. Fyodor pressed himself against the wall, muttering something inaudibly. Litvin stood there, swaying. Mole cursed. He hoped that at least this one would hold out. But it seemed that their smart guy was seriously twisted too. Only Pathfinder stubbornly moved forward, and the girl, strangely enough, did not lag behind him. But it seemed that they were marking time. "We have to go," Mole said to Litvin. "Yeah," Litvin responded quite sensibly. And Mole felt relief at first. But he continued, "Of course I remember that movie. There was a vampire slayer in it, who later had an imposter daughter. But he was never able to save the girl. Shh, there they are, do you see? We need to let them get closer to shoot for sure." Mole grabbed his head. Then he saw Pathfinder sitting on the sleepers, trying to aim his machine gun at an invisible enemy, and a girl was tugging at his sleeve, trying to lift him up.
"To battle!"
shouted Pathfinder.
"The fascists will not pass! Death to the Fourth Reich!"
I hope he doesn't shoot us all here, thought Mole. "Uncle Vasya, there's no one here, let's go." The girl begged, somehow miraculously maintaining her presence of mind. "Good boy, hold on," Mole shouted. His own voice seemed weak and uncertain to him. Then he cursed and grabbed Iron by the shoulder, shaking him. "Let's go! No time to be sad. There are still beauties waiting for us." Iron seemed to come to his senses a little, moved forward, at first swaying, then more and more confidently. Then Mole turned to Fyodor, who resisted weakly at first, but then allowed himself to be dragged. Pathfinder rose himself, brushing off the shadows as if they were a swarm of insects. The girl, convinced that the commander had regained his senses, trudged after him. Litvin, as if suddenly realizing, also rushed forward. The haze suddenly seemed to dissipate on its own, leaving only a painful memory. The lamps still flickered faintly here and there, but their flashes were no longer dangerous to people. Mole, looking back, dragging Fyodor, hurriedly caught up with the others, especially since Pathfinder, who was walking ahead, slowed down and then stopped altogether. The stalkers gathered around him, examining the twisted fragments of the hermetic gate, as if torn out by the hand of a giant. The remains of a machine gun nest, some rags, a boot covered in what seemed to be dried blood. Scattered sandbags testified to a futile attempt to block the path inside for unknown forces. "Oh, those rascally boys have lost their lives," muttered Pathfinder, paying tribute to the courage of the unknown sentries. A few more steps and the stalkers saw stars above their heads in the gaps in the clouds. They had managed to reach the open section of the stretch of road that connected Volgogradka and Tekstil. No matter how many times he had climbed up, Mole was always afraid and waiting for this moment. When, instead of low vaults, an endless expanse would open up above his head, in which he could drown. He froze in place, getting used to it, looking around. Both newcomers, apparently, were also stunned. They were turning their heads in confusion. Pathfinder, holding his machine gun at the ready, looked at the thick walls that fenced off the tracks. The detachment was in a ditch, along the bottom of which were laid rails, dimly shining in the moonlight. On the sloping slopes, the grass as tall as a man was green, in which something rustled suspiciously every now and then. On the right-hand side, a brick booth with a walled-up entrance towered. Iron picked up a stone, threw it to the side, and immediately some small animals, or maybe huge insects, scattered in all directions, and only the swaying blades of grass indicated their progress. Mole showed him his fist. He himself was peering tensely to the right, whereas he remembered there was an abandoned factory building ahead. So far he could not see anything. The wall was in the way,
in which holes were visible here and there. It was quite possible that they had been made by the same creatures that now inhabited the nearby ruins. The stalkers looked around warily for a few more minutes, but everything seemed calm. As agreed beforehand, this time Iron went first, followed by Pathfinder, his companion in Litvin, and Mole was put in the rear. Thick wires snaked and intertwined along the walls enclosing the rails, and scraps of barbed wire were visible at the top. Bushes grew wildly behind the walls, hanging over the road, and in some places their tops met or even intertwined, creating a green tunnel in which life of its own was also going on. Giant slugs were slowly eating the green leaves. Further on, an earthen embankment was erected, cut through by a tunnel, but a short one, only a few meters long. Some kind of road passed in this place above. At the exit from the tunnel, a beetle, the size of a plate, suddenly fell with a thud onto the rails in front of the travelers. The insect was lying on its back, and its legs were moving weakly. The mole shuddered in disgust, looking at the black limbs bending and unbending, slightly jagged, equipped with forked claws at the ends. If he hadn't been wearing chemicals, such a paw, having touched him in passing, could have torn off a strip of skin. Stalker saw how Pathfinder's companion nervously shied away. Her nerves had apparently completely given out. True, Mole immediately felt ashamed of his thoughts, remembering the girl's courageous behavior in the tunnel with the crazy electricity, where they all lost their heads. A little further ahead, another bridge was visible, thrown across the tracks, a metal one, once painted gray. The paint was still almost intact. When they passed under it, the road gradually went up, and soon the rails were almost level with the street, which ran parallel to the tracks. On the right, like a rotten tooth, a massive concrete fragment stuck out. Mole suddenly thought that someone was hiding behind it, but the stalker decided that he had imagined it. The wall, fenced with barbed wire, became lower, and the stalkers could already make out buildings on the sides. On the left, behind the wall, parallel to the tracks, there was a highway, clogged with rusty carcasses. There were trucks, cars, and trolleybuses. The outlines of buildings could be made out in the darkness behind it. The closest one had a very strange shape, like a glass cube with a square depression in the front. It was cut in two by a vertical glass tube, belted in the middle by a ring. Neither give nor take, a giant thermometer sticking out of a glass stand, such as the Mole had seen in the infirmary. Nearby loomed a building, resembling a huge glass cone mushroom, inverted base upwards, jauntily tilted to one side. Mole fancied he saw some movement near it. Perhaps the moonbeams were playing in the glass windows. Gazing, the stalker almost forgot about caution. A drawn-out howl, heard very close by, instantly brought him back to reality. The detachment hurried. The Mole scanned the surroundings with his eyes. There was a long factory building on the right. Something resembling a large monkey easily climbed the wall and disappeared through one of the windows. Damn, he thought. Will they really notice? A strange cry reached him, something between a howl and a groan. The squad immediately stopped, their hands reaching for their weapons. "Don't shoot," Iron commanded in a muffled voice. "They say they have excellent hearing. If a crowd of beauties comes running, no one will help us." And, after a pause, he said, "Let's go. Maybe we'll make it in time." The night was windy. The leaves of the bushes surrounding the road rustled. Probably this played into their hands. It seemed that they had not been spotted yet. It turned out that the open section was not so long, and soon they again entered the vaults of the tunnel. There was a lot of moss and strange mushrooms. Giant centipedes were thrown around. Creepy, but in fact, harmless creatures. Quite quickly they reached the hermetic gates, apparently separating the station from the outside world. Iron shone a flashlight. A button was found on the side of the wall. After hesitating, he pressed with all his might. Then he began to knock, trying not to make much noise. But no one answered. The gates were locked. Apparently they had not been used for a long time. The expedition was under threat. At least turn back. Exactly, I remember. Someone told me that the hermetic seal was closed here tightly, Pathfinder suddenly said. Wasn't it fate to tell me earlier? Mole got angry. What should we do now? There seems to be an entrance on the other side, but we still have to get there. They returned to the tunnel exit and began to look around, trying to figure out where the paths laid by people were. Stalker saw an arrow painted in black on a peeling white wall at the entrance to the tunnel, pointing to the left, and decided that it was probably a sign. Surely mutants hadn't drawn it. Lord, do I really have to climb up? He groaned. Looking around, Mole noticed a rusty metal ladder with 2 flights, rising up the wall dividing the tunnels. He was the first to carefully climb up it, doubtfully testing the rusty steps with his foot. Although the height is not that great, he does not want to fall down. The 2 flights of stairs, as if by a miracle, were held on the wall. Probably at one time they were intended for repairing communications. The rest of the squad stood below, waiting. The stalker climbed the ladder, almost falling down, nimbly threw his leg over some low fence at the top, waved his hand as if to say he had climbed safely, and looked around. Well, where did we end up? The rails stretched off into the distance in several rows, sometimes converging, sometimes diverging. Well, yes, there is also a railroad here, and where is the entrance to the metro? Meanwhile, the head of the next one appeared from below. Apparently they got tired of waiting below. It turned out to be Litvin. The Pathfinder's companion nimbly climbed after him, then Fyodor, the Pathfinder himself, and lastly, Medny. Apparently they deliberately left him until the end so that the others would not suffer if the ladder collapsed under his weight. The mole looked to the right. There was a tunnel under the tracks. Surely it would have been possible to get to the other side by an easier way, if not for the damned beauties that he was already imagining behind almost every bush. Although it is better not to go into the tunnels. You never know, maybe some mutant has made a lair there. Spiders, for example, really like to nest in such places. On the left, on the contrary, there was a steep climb, bushes, some stairs with railings, along which either sheds or former market stalls were clinging. It was already impossible to tell one from the other. The mole caught on the barbed wire, cursed with annoyance. You see, they set traps for the white man. Finally, they managed to climb up the slope, and Mole found himself on the side of a wide highway. Now the only cover they could find was rusty car skeletons. Mole explained to the others that they had to move in short dashes, and the first one set the example. At first, everything seemed to be going fine. But suddenly, he thought he saw movement to the side. The stalker, in a panic, burst into the open door of the nearest car, collapsed on the half-rotten cushions, and froze, hoping that they wouldn't notice. Although the hope was weak, most mutants had an excellent sense of smell. Just not the beauties, he mentally prayed. Nothing happened for a while. Then he carefully turned his head and saw the source of the noise that had frightened him. A small creature was angrily gnawing at something nearby, growling furiously. Having decided that this creature did not pose any particular danger to him, Mole turned his head in the other direction. He saw a mummy in the seat next to him. The driver was sitting, leaning against the dashboard. It's very close to the metro, Mole thought for some reason. How could he not have made it in time? Did he feel ill on the way and die, just short of reaching the saving shelter? Or had the hermetic shelter already been closed by that time, which is why he stayed here? The stalker came to his senses, remembering that time was passing. He carefully looked out from his hiding place, looking for the others. And very close by, he saw the Pathfinder hiding, and a little further away, the girl. Iron was also found, who rushed forward to the next passenger car. Fedor followed him along the same path. Mole caught up with them and Pathfinder and his companion soon joined him. Mole examined the asphalt, looking for some road signs, but found nothing, and began to suspect that the arrow on the wall was painted as a distraction, or meant something else altogether. Ahead of the road hung a covered bridge crossing from one side to the other. While they were thinking, something changed imperceptibly around them. Mole looked around. The moon was still illuminating the ruins, but now they didn't look so dead. Something stirred nearby, a bush fluttering in the wind, or someone tall, taller than a man, moving. Iron apparently felt something too, and looked around restlessly. Only the girl stood calmly. It seemed she didn't understand why everyone was fussing so much. Or maybe, on the contrary, she was in shock. After all, experienced stalkers have some kind of sense that warns of danger, thought Mole. He became nervous. It seemed to him that he could already clearly see 3 dark silhouettes, taller than a man, moving towards them from the direction of the former plant. And they still couldn't figure out where they should go now to get to the station. Iron and Mole had a short meeting. Copper said that on the right he saw tents where, judging by the remains of the signs, they once sold flowers, souvenirs, and other junk. And this is a sure sign that the entrance to the metro station is very close. And in general, he turned out to be right. But they still barely found this entrance. The treasured doors were almost lost in a row of other, unnecessary ones, some former cafes and kiosks. And when the stalkers poked their nose into one of the doors, they were met with an unfriendly growl. It seemed that a dog had made a den there. They flew back like a bullet. Fortunately, no one began to pursue them. Having gone down the steps, they again found themselves in front of the hermetic gates, but now Mole's spirit was revived. It was clear that a path had been laid through the rubbish, that people walked here regularly. The stalkers conferred. Then Mole carefully pressed a button visible on the side. A peephole opened in the door, and for a while someone looked at them from the other side. "Who's there?" A muffled voice finally came from somewhere under the ceiling. "Ours." "All our own people stay at home," the voice said instructively, and, after a pause, added, "And strangers don't come here." "Who did you draw the arrows for?" Iron couldn't help but ask. "For the mutants?" "We are stalkers from the metro," shouted Mole. "Who can figure you out? All sorts of people walk around here," the voice responded apathetically. Iron held out his stalker ID cards in front of him just in case, although he doubted that they could be seen through the peephole. "Let us go, men," shouted Mole. "Why did you come here? Why couldn't you just sit at home?" the voice asked. "Are you afraid?" "I can't talk through the door. Honestly, we didn't mean anything bad. Do you want to leave us to be eaten by the creatures?" "How many of you are there?" the voice asked apathetically. "5," shouted the Mole, and immediately realized that, in his haste, he had forgotten someone, it seemed. "Okay, just wait," the voice responded phlegmatically. Minutes passed one after another, and they still stood by the door. Apparently, the owner of the voice had gone to consult with the management. What did he care? He was inside, safe. They were outside. Mole was nervous, looking around. He imagined humanoid creatures getting closer and closer to them, hiding behind rusty cars. When the stalkers had almost lost hope, the gate creaked open. "Enter, one by one, slowly." The voice from above was heard again. "Put your weapons by the door. They will be returned to you later." The first door on the right. They found themselves in the anteroom. Behind the right door there was a cramped shower room, tiled. When the stalkers entered, Water gushed from rusty watering cans mounted on the ceiling. The feeble streams washed away the radioactive dust. At least, the travelers wanted to hope so. Having thus undergone at least some treatment, they headed to the next door. Apparently, a locker room was equipped there, and began to pull off gas masks and chemical protection. Steam was billowing in the room, and yet Mole noticed that someone was missing. He glanced around the locker room. There was Iron, in a stretched sweatshirt and khaki pants, with a potbelly already emerging, annoyingly rubbing his ear. When he pulled off the gas mask, he almost tore an earring out of his ear. There was Fyodor in a faded black t-shirt and sweatpants. Here the girl is, adjusting her red curls, previously hidden under a baseball cap, with an expression in her eyes as if she had not yet recovered from the horror she had experienced. Mole couldn't help but admire her. But then, Iron turned around, saw the girl, and whistled. Apparently they didn't think it necessary to let him in on the secret, and he thought that Pathfinder had taken another boy on as an intern. The girl immediately tensed up, put on her headdress, looked around, met Mole's gaze, winced in annoyance, and turned away. Okay, thought Mole. Let's just not take her up there anymore. Let her sit at the station. Look how she shied away from the bug. And if she runs into someone scarier than the bug, she'll faint. How thin and pale she is. Well, there are a lot of them on the Red Line. They're always short of food there. You wouldn't call her a beauty, perhaps, but she has a nice face. A thin, neat nose. Only her mouth is a bit wide, perhaps like a frog's. The stalker's red hair reminded him of something long forgotten, but now was not the time to deal with it. Iron snorted. It turns out we have our own beauty. The girl shuddered. Oh, come on, muttered Mole. You weren't in a hurry to meet those beauties upstairs. There's too many of them. Iron snorted. Besides, I hear they're too sinewy for my taste. You should have warned me. He turned to the girl. This is going to be a tough hike. If I had known that Pathfinder would drag you along, I would have gone alone, or with him. He nodded at Mole. You know, we don't have sewing classes here. I wasn't hiding, actually, the girl snapped, the insult seeming to give her courage. If you had asked who I was, I would have told you. What should I have asked? Checked before leaving to see if there was a woman in disguise among us? Medney was indignant. I didn't change my clothes on purpose. Maybe I should have worn a skirt in the tunnels so that I wouldn't be mistaken for a guy. The girl almost cried. And anyway, I didn't go with you. I went with the commander. Iron sighed and placed his hand on the obstinate girl's shoulder in a fatherly manner, but she nervously shied away from him in surprise. Don't be afraid of me, baby. I don't bite, he admonished. But I think it was a shame they took you along. You should go home to your mother. Mom died. Thanks for reminding me. The redhead's eyes sparkled. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to offend. Copper spread his hands. But you don't look old enough either. Don't think that I have a good attitude towards women in principle, but everyone should know their place. I'd rather send you back, but where to now? It's too late. Although it's none of my business, let your commander answer for you. You're not the first, and not the last one who is eager to fight. I've seen many like that, and guess where they are now? Those who survived, who actually turned out to be something, can be counted on the fingers of one hand. But I know that trying to dissuade them in such cases is practically useless. Sort it out yourselves. In fact, at the moment, I'm more interested in where your boss is. Where is this Apache chief? This unique person who didn't play enough Indians as a child? The girl shrugged her thin shoulders, wanted to pull her baseball cap down further, but dropped it on the tiled floor. She flushed with annoyance. And then, Fyodor, who'd been silent all this time, quickly picked up her simple headdress and respectfully handed it to the girl. She beamed and thanked him with a smile. Well, well, Fyodor is giving it to her, thought Mole. But he's right. Why did Copper attack the girl? Pathfinder brought her. He's responsible for her. According to the information he had, they wanted to get rid of the girl. As Krot was told, she was the daughter of some important person, but not from his legal wife. And now, some difficulties had arisen with her. Either she herself had begun to show her character at inopportune times, or some unsuitable suitor had appeared.
But the stalker still involuntarily liked the girl. She did not look capricious and spoiled. Rather, hunted and frightened. And her hands were covered in burrs and scratches. This gave him hope that they were growing from the right place in the girl. Mole looked into the shower. Pathfinder was still standing there, although the water was already barely dripping. "Let's go," Mole barked so loudly that Pathfinder jumped in surprise. While he was undressing, Iron muttered sarcastically that the red line must be really bad with water, since Pathfinder liked taking a shower for free so much. However, Mole decided that Iron was simply trying to hide his nervousness from the not particularly warm reception. Pathfinder, having joined the company, immediately understood what had happened. He noticed both the girl's embarrassment and Iron's indignant face. But he didn't explain anything, and there was no time to deal with him. Perhaps he deliberately lingered in the shower so that the others wouldn't have time to take out their displeasure on him. Mole thought that he had probably taught the girl to hide her face under the peak of her baseball cap and keep quiet until they got to their destination, to avoid unnecessary gossip and unwanted attention. In fact, this was not the first time a girl had traveled by subway disguised as a guy, but few people had come to any good from such trips. Mole had heard several similar stories. They went through the next door. Behind it, a whole group of armed men met the stalkers. Mole carefully examined their pale, thin faces. It looked like they were also eating half-starved here. Everyone was dressed in whatever they could, some in an old coat, some in a quilted jacket, some even in a down jacket despite the summer night. True, everyone's shoes were relatively sturdy. Good boots, some even had boots. But the weapons were also very different, from an old AKM and a Makarov pistol to a hunting knife. What a meeting. Iron tried to defuse the situation. It didn't help. The men's faces remained impassive. "Who are you?" asked a man with a purple face and an evil gleam in his eyes. "We are stalkers." "Ah, stalkers then. The man's seen enough of them. You can't fool me." The mole looked back. Perhaps the man could be understood. Iron, with his tattoos and the cropped fetter and a leather jacket, really did look suspicious. "We have a woman with us," Litvin said through gritted teeth, turning pale. "So what?" the man responded. "It's a distraction. Bandits have girlfriends like that, even worse than men." Iron pulled out the stalker's scabs, but that didn't help either. "Why are you poking me with your ID? Give me a piece of paper and I'll draw you whatever you want." "I know stalkers like that. I've seen enough. I'll put you up against the wall right now and forget about your names." He raised his machine gun. "What are you hanging around here for? What are you sniffing around for? We don't bother you, and you shouldn't either. We've had some like that before. We've all been covered in cement." "Don't scare me, I'm scared," Iron said ominously. "You're brave, fighting unarmed people." The travelers exchanged glances. The expedition was ready to end before it had really begun. Litvin turned even paler. Pathfinder's cheeks began to twitch. The redhead, who had hidden her hair under her baseball cap, seemed not to be breathing. And then Mole, who had somehow found both calm and reasonableness in the face of danger, said to the man in cold blood, "Go ahead, try it. Put it against the wall. Just don't blame yourself later if a whole squad from the big metro comes and razes you to the ground. They won't leave a stone on a stone of your station." He was bluffing, of course. Hardly anyone would bother to investigate their disappearance. They would rather decide that stalkers are paid for the risk and leave them to their own fate.
but apparently his words sounded quite convincing. Comrade Muskvin will show you how to create obstacles for the red stalkers, the purple-faced pathfinder continued. Yeah, right. We've seen some of those, the angry man muttered, but not so confidently. He finally noticed the cap with the red star, and the mention of Comrade Muskvin clearly did its job. Another man, who had been silent until then, considered it necessary to intervene. Okay, Sioma, take it easy. Maybe they really are stalkers. And turning to the strangers, he said peacefully, Our father Semyon is shell-shocked. That's why he's a bit nervous.
You know how many scum used to hang around here at one time? You just had to fight them off. Now that the mutants have appeared, no one really sticks their noses in. They're kind of protecting us. But the old-timers still remember the old days. You're really good at welcoming guests. Iron still couldn't calm down. Accompanied by locals, the stalkers went out into the tunnel and rather quickly, climbing the steps, found themselves in the hall of the Textilschiki station. Chapter 3. Reservation. Krot didn't like the station very much. The walls were made of gray, dirty plastic panels, although the upper part was lined with a row of multicolored rectangles. The station seemed to say with its entire appearance, so we also tried to decorate ourselves as best we could. Many panels were cracked. In some places they had fallen off, and apparently no one was in a hurry to fix them. The rectangular columns showed off metal slats at the corners. Krot noticed rows of motley tents, some with picturesque motley patches. It looked like a gypsy camp had set up here. Here and there, underfoot, lay once beautiful but very worn carpets. As if, after the Holocaust, the residents had dragged in the first thing that came to hand and then waved their hand at improvement, and now everything is gradually deteriorating and falling into disrepair. Maybe people have started going up less often lately, because of the mutants. People don't want to risk their lives for bribes anymore, Mole decided. The people they encountered, mostly women of indeterminate age, glanced askance at the new arrivals and then hurried on. However, Mole noted that the locals were not dressed in rags. The women, even the elderly ones, were sporting colorful dresses or colorful scarves thrown over their shoulders, with shiny earrings in their ears, as if trying to outdo each other in the mottliness of their attire. Perhaps they were trying to compensate for the grayness of underground life? Although pale, they did not look exhausted at all. The men preferred loose, baggy pants and warm sweatshirts. It seemed that no one was paying much attention to the newcomers, and at the same time, Mole felt that they were being secretly studied. This made him feel somehow unpleasant. Why are they so intimidated here, he thought. The stalker felt uneasy. However, strangers were usually treated with caution everywhere. And here a whole group had come to visit. However, he would have felt calmer if a crowd had gathered around, openly marveling at the strangers, and these sidelong glances, curious and at the same time unfriendly, unsettled him. Apparently, newcomers from the big metro were not particularly welcome here, but it was not immediately clear why. Perhaps there had been some unpleasant incidents when residents had to defend their property from guests. By the way, there was no particular kindness in sight. The station apparently lived by the principle of anything goes in the household. Mole came across a variety of objects: rusty buckets, aluminum frames, car tires. They were apparently especially popular here. With the help of imagination and a knife, some of them were turned into something like round bowls, inside which all sorts of junk was also lying around. And near one tent, Mole was amazed to see a bird with a long neck, cut out of the same tire. Although it would seem that if the residents wanted to, they had plenty of opportunities to decorate the station. Upstairs, in the empty apartments, there was probably a lot of junk left: furniture, dishes. Maybe the station's inhabitants liked to make things themselves. Or maybe they were driven by nostalgia. After all,
The same homemade products probably once decorated their yards. The commandant settled down in the utility room. It was a little cozier here. In the tiled room on the floor, there was an almost new red carpet with a border, a massive oval table and several sagging red chairs covered with throws of faded fabric with a small flower pattern. Mole carefully examined the man sitting in front of them at the table, about 50 years old with a bald spot, an expressionless face, tiredly rubbing his forehead with his hand. He was wearing a good, long, and warm khaki jacket, but despite this, he was somehow shivering, as if he was constantly shivering. He looked extremely exhausted, but he carefully examined the new arrivals. From the big metro, then? It's been a while since we've had anyone from there. Well, let's get acquainted. It's me, Fyodor Nikolaevich. He looked expectantly at the guests. Red Pathfinder Vasily, Pathfinder said boldly. Copper, Iron muttered abruptly. The commandant raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask again. Apparently, he decided that it was a surname. Mole, Fyodor, and Litvin also introduced themselves, but Iskra remained silent, lowering her head. Is this beauty the wife of one of you? The commandant asked. A spark flared. This is my trainee, the red-faced Pathfinder said crisply. You have strange rules in the big metro, the commandant concluded. Thank God, we ourselves don't go there since the training ground on Proletarka was set up for the overfed Hanseatic League members. Ugh, you had to think of that. What a nastiness. What about Hansa? Is it getting richer? Iron nodded vaguely. And where are you from? The commandant looked suspiciously at the equipment of those who arrived. We're stalkers, father, Iron Copper explained. Where are we from? I'm from the Red Line, and so are they. He pointed at Pathfinder and his companion. Stalkers are allowed through the metro everywhere without hindrance, because we're doing something that's necessary for everyone. There'll be no one to go up there, and we'll have to eat only mushrooms and pork, the commandant chuckled. It's a necessary thing. But I've heard that you charge such high prices for food that not everyone can afford it. Those are traders, shuttle traders, and middlemen. But we don't go too far, Iron was indignant. And then we have to risk our lives. That should also be taken into account. We have scouts at the station too, the commandant sighed. But now the mutants have become completely insolent. More and more often we have to go to the Kuzminskis to bow down. And they also need to be paid off, although, it would seem, they could help out as neighbors. So we live between two fires. On one side mutants, on the other, greedy neighbors. It is still unknown which is worse. Like in a reservation, Litvin blurted out. The commandant looked at him for a moment with an expressionless gaze, then stared at Iron again. So is it now the fashion of the Reds to draw pictures on themselves like the criminals? He asked sarcastically. However, Iron's calculations were justified. When the Reds were mentioned, the commandant softened. I'm just kidding. You don't look like gangsters. I've seen enough of them. How did you get past the mutants? One of our desperate guys once went that way for some medicine. He was scared out of his wits, he said. Well, said Litvin, it's not that easy to get to you. Were the hermetic gates walled up because of the mutants? Of course, the commandant sighed. We were the ones left behind. And who doesn't come here to get us? And the way they howl sometimes at night, you can hear it even through the hermetic seal. They put on such concerts. At least they mostly gather in the ruins of the plant. Apparently they consider it their territory. Well, and the open distillation run at the same time. And they rarely poke their noses outside the fence, although our miners are still afraid. They don't go up here anymore. They go through Kuzminki and share with the people there. And they still look askance, as if we're robbing them. After all, it's clear to everyone that what's up there belongs to the one who managed to find it first. Yeah, these mutants really screwed us up. Damn them. So what did the capital's guests want on our outskirts this time? Xena, he shouted, and when a middle-aged woman appeared in response to the call, wearing a headscarf, a worn blue robe, and felt slippers, he ordered, "Make some tea for the guests." Zena, with a curious glance, slowly trudged off to the next utility room. The commandant gestured for everyone to sit down. "We're heading to Kuzminki to scout out the situation," Krot reported bravely, trying to inspire confidence in his interlocutor. It seemed he didn't succeed very well. But he was glad that the question of the stalker's affiliation with one state or another was no longer raised. The station master would hardly have been delighted to learn that one of the guests was a representative of that same overfed Hansa. What kind of situation could there be there? The same mutants, as if we don't have enough of our own scouts. The commandant sighed with some relief, studying their passes. They seemed to be real. A whole range of feelings could be read on his face. On the one hand, what if the aliens could bring some benefit to the station, and it wasn't worth spoiling relations with the big metro? On the other hand, who knows why they came? Better to let them go on their way. He clearly didn't want the guests to poke their noses into his business. Zena, accompanied by a younger girl dressed in jeans, a shabby black sweater, and slippers, brought several mismatched cups with steam rising from them, and served flatbreads on a chipped plate. Having placed the treats on the table, the women paused for a moment, looking at the guests. They were apparently especially interested in the red-haired girl, and she sat, looking down, her eyes cast down, like a schoolgirl who had skipped classes in the principal's office. She had somehow hidden her hair under a baseball cap, raised the collar of a man's khaki shirt, hunched over, and generally tried to hide as much as possible behind Pathfinder's back. But it was still noticeable that she was a girl. Thin wrists stuck out touchingly from overly wide sleeves. Mole examined her hands, all scratched, long, thin fingers with hangnails. She suddenly raised her head and stared straight at him with questioning brown eyes. He was embarrassed and looked away. Zena, shaking her head disapprovingly, fixed her eyes on Iron. She seemed to be fascinated by the earring hanging from her ear, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, the tattoo visible on her shoulder. He chuckled, barely audibly. The commandant looked impatiently at the women, and they immediately disappeared, as if by the wind. The tea was thin and not very tasty, but it was hot, and Mole, scalding himself, sipped impatiently, enjoying the warmth spreading through his body. Only now did he realize that here at the station, it was somehow damp and chilly, even on this warm summer night. Meanwhile, the commandant was saying, "Kuzminki has its own management. You will negotiate with them. Here, for example," he grinned, 3 stations were cut off from the main metro. And of course, at first, we wanted to unite, and it seemed like we even agreed. But we could not agree on the details. Take the same name. Everyone suggested their own. The Kuzminskis wanted the alliance to be named after their station. Those from Ryazansky Prospect stood for the Ryazan Federation. It sounds good, of course. But we also wanted our station to be mentioned in the name. So we did not really come to anything. Now we are considered the Ryazan community.
А также провинаваться небезопасно и потому что понятно видно.
And we have no need to be clever. In the large metro, this is a struggle between powers for resources. And no one wants to conquer us. It will cost themselves more. However, if anyone comes to us, we will be able to give a worthy rebuff.
The commandant's voice clanged with metal. He did not look at anyone, but Mole took this as a warning.
And mutants don't care whether we have a name or not.
The commandant continued.
So here's the deal. We'll give you your weapons back when you leave the station. If anything, you can have lunch in the kitchen. Not fancy, of course, but you won't go hungry.
Iron grinned. The commandant muttered something embarrassed about the difficulties with the food. Iron took a slightly burnt flatbread and broke it off. It tasted like sawdust, but he heroically began to chew.
The Pathfinder, leaning back in his chair, ate with the commandant's eyes, but did not say a word.
How are things in your tunnels? Is it dangerous?
Mole asked. Not really. The the Commandant shrugged. Sometimes some mole rats crawl up, but otherwise, it's nothing. Blind people? Iron was amazed. From the Commandant's subsequent explanations, they understood that this was what they called giant worms or snakes that were sometimes encountered in the large metro. I'll give you an escort, so that you'll feel calmer and so that there will be fewer questions for you in Kuzminki, the Commandant promised. The stalkers left the utility room and walked through the station, once again feeling the curious glances of the locals. It was noticeable that the station was not deep. The young people looked frail and pale. One had ulcers on his face, another sported a shiny bald head. Looking back, Mole noticed that Pathfinder was not with them. The redhead was trailing behind Litvin.
Where is our Chingaguk the Great Serpent? Iron asked indignantly, his mood not much improved by the less than cordial reception. On the other hand, he was clearly relieved. Strangers could have been treated much worse here. Where is this Red Chief? The redhead glanced at Iron in surprise, and Mole found it funny. Enough, he scolded himself. You don't know much either. Would you like it if someone laughed at you? That's what his mother usually said to him, and Mole felt a pang of sadness, as he always did when he remembered her. He hadn't known anything about her since the Holocaust, and he assumed the worst. She must have died up there, like many others, and he, by pure chance, had been sent to his grandfather that day. He had boarded at Vikino, thinking that he would be getting off the metro in half an hour, and not knowing that the next time he would be on the surface would be a very, very long time ago, and that he would never see his family again.
His mother walked him to the turnstiles. He was tall and looked older than his age, so they let him through calmly, alone. Mole knew the tickets for the commuter train that stopped near Vikino station were not sold to girls without a passport. And yet, one day, he and his older sister managed, having deceived both their mother and the vigilant ticket sellers, to escape to the center for a walk for the whole day. Mole sighed at the thought of what could have happened, and probably did happen, to his mother and sister. Then he looked back. A very displeased Pathfinder was catching up with them. He cast an unkind glance at the red-haired girl, and Mole guessed that the Commandant had probably detained him to talk about the girl, and that the conversation was hardly pleasant. Although, it would seem, what business did the station commander have with strangers? Citizens, one might say, of another state. And yet, Mole often encountered manifestations of concern for the weak, in places where he did not expect it at all. On the one hand, the catastrophe seemed to have put everyone in such conditions when the strongest survives and the weak are left to adapt or perish. But both before and after the catastrophe, there were those who did not consider it necessary to give up their place or food to a woman, and those who considered it self-evident to look after the helpless. In the food block, they were served some brown puree on chipped plates, not very appetizing in appearance or smell. However, they didn't charge much, 3 cartridges per person. What is this? Iron asked. Mushrooms, the girl, dressed like Xena in a dressing gown and tied with a kerchief, calmly answered, wielding a spoon in a huge pot. If you don't like it, don't eat it. You can't please you, the center. At the same time, she glanced with obvious suspicion at the ring in Iron's ear and the tattoo visible on his neck. Okay, Iron muttered. I see it's better to go visiting with your own supplies. The cook remained silent, but her face clearly showed what she thought of uninvited guests, even if they were from the big metro. Damn people. After everything we've been through, it wouldn't hurt to have a drink. Iron turned to the others. And it wouldn't hurt to get some sleep. I'm already passing out, to be honest. Don't torture your soul. We'll wait until Kuzminki, muttered Pathfinder. Somehow we didn't seem like a good fit for her. Iron sighed when the half-starved stalkers said goodbye to the unfriendly cook. Which is a pity. I always preferred to be friends with the food service workers. I understand why, Pathfinder continued. You're all covered in pictures. You look like a gangster. That's why she tensed up. Iron chuckled, but said nothing. They probably don't particularly like aliens from the big metro here, Litvin concluded. They live hungry, and they think that we're living it up there, building landfills for fun. At the checkpoint at the entrance to the tunnel leading to Kuzminki, an escort was already waiting for them. A short man, shivering in a quilted jacket. It turned out that Pathfinder had fallen behind again. Where is our leader and teacher? Where is our Montegomo Hawkclaw? Iron asked tearfully. Litvin chuckled, but without condemnation. Mole, meanwhile, continued to look at the redhead. He could not shake the thought that he had seen her once before. The girl noticed, blushed, turned away. Who did she remind him of? Thin, with white skin and red hair, freckles on her cheeks. Noticeable. He would not forget someone like her. And her eyes were brown, such a warm color. You would not call her a beauty, but you cannot take your eyes off her. He looks, and his soul becomes cheerful, as if the sun has risen. Yes, the sun. Mole sighed. Where is our leader, Falconfeather? Ian persisted. He'll sleep through the entire world revolution at this rate. The Pathfinder, who had caught up with the squad, cast a suspicious glance at him, but Iron made the most innocent face. Where have you been? Asked the mole. The ranger muttered something about the mood of the locals, which it would not hurt to get to know better. Did you go to the people? You better drop your propaganda tricks. Stop agitating. Otherwise we'll be thrown out of here in no time. This isn't the red line, warned Krot. What the people believe in here, how they live, it's none of our business. He had no idea that very soon these superstitions would affect them in the most direct way. They went deeper into the tunnel. The guide was taciturn and answered questions in monosyllables. Fortunately, the travelers did not encounter any mole rats along the way. They only scared off a few rats, which Mole considered a good sign. The tunnel was quite damp, and water splashed underfoot. It's no wonder that no one is rushing here, Iron muttered. These damn light bulbs will discourage anyone from wandering around outside Volgogradka. What was the point of becoming a stalker if, when you see a broken light bulb, you start calling for your mother? Pathfinder asked, as if into space. Was it me who called for Mom? Copper started. You were definitely remembering some mother, Mole said cheerfully. Unless it's the great mother of all things, Iron said, offended. On the approaches to Kuzminki, they were already moving slowly. Fatigue was telling. The guard on the approaches to the station was purely symbolic. An old man in a quilted jacket, warm, shabby trousers, and felt boots with a rifle was sitting in the tunnel on an ancient chair and nodding off. Hearing them approaching, he jerked and grabbed the rifle more comfortably. Wait, who goes there? He shouted excitedly. A skinny, fair-haired boy appeared behind him, chewing something. He was obviously going out for a bite to eat. Kuzmich, is it you? The old man's escort called out. No, not me, snapped the grandfather. You see what there is to ask. And who is this with you? And these are guests from whom you didn't expect them. Welcome them. The grandfather, squinting weakly, looked at the documents. No, you need to see the commandant, he muttered. Let the authorities sort it out. My business is small. Vaska, show me the way. The boy, looking back at the guests every now and then, headed for the stairs leading to the station. The stalkers followed him, their gaze opening up to the walls, lined here and there with yellowish plates that had flown off. The station was also without any particular frills. The same square tall columns. Only the walls were decorated here and there with forged inserts, but Mole liked it much more. He looked at the little animals on the inserts, familiar from his previous life. Squirrels, birds, fish, and also, it seemed, a deer. He had never seen them in nature. Did they really live in these parts too? Or maybe they still live there, only they have changed, like all living things, in the 20 years that have passed since the catastrophe. And, who knows, maybe bears and wolves can be found here on the surface. Although they are hardly more dangerous than beauties, he still has no desire to meet them. There was a smell of burnt porridge from somewhere. A disgruntled female voice could be heard. The stalker's gaze caught on a wooden frame standing in the middle of the station.
Wow. Is this your canteen or the House of Soviets?
He asked Vaska. This is Grikova's house, he muttered.
Your boss?
Actually, he's a stalker, the boy muttered reluctantly. He built himself up, damn it. And people don't mind that you took up so much space. He doesn't give a damn about people, the cheapskate. The commandant doesn't contradict him. He fawns over him because he's one of the luckiest breadwinners, and he doesn't care what the common people say. In the village, they would have burned him down long ago, Vaska said authoritatively, obviously repeating the words of one of the elders. But here you go. You'll burn down the whole station for company. You have to endure it. And the boy spat at his feet with annoyance, like an adult, not paying attention to the disapproving look of the woman standing nearby. Mole automatically noted to himself that the local women did not overuse bright clothes. Gray and khaki predominated in their clothes, and many wore all black. True, on some of them the black dresses faded from numerous washes looked unpresentable. But it seemed that no one paid attention to this. Strange people, thought Mole. Where did your Grekov get the logs? He asked Vaska. Yes, I brought them from above. They were sold nearby before the Holocaust. They decided that Pathfinder, Litvin, Iron, and Mole would talk to the commandant, and Fedor and the red-haired girl were left for now near the nearest tent, under the protection of the boy, as hostages. They were immediately surrounded by curious people, but they did not pester with questions. They looked at them silently, and this made them feel somehow uneasy. Well, what are you standing there for? Go away, the boy grumbled, clearly proud of the important mission entrusted to him. The rest of the delegation went to the commandant's utility room. This room looked modest. The table was a board placed on 4 blocks. The commandant was sitting on a wooden bench. Opposite him stood the same one for guests. On the floor was spread a woven rug. At the edges of the table stood 2 guards with rifles at the ready. The commandant had obviously been warned about the visit, and he decided not to lose face in front of the guests from the big metro. Mole had no doubt that the guards had appeared precisely in connection with their arrival. It was unlikely that they usually kept constant watch in the office. The commandant of the Kuzminki station turned out to be a tall, strong man in a striped shirt and sweatpants, with a broad face and a fleshy, glaucous nose. There was a barely noticeable scar on his forehead, and Mole thought that the man had probably risen to the surface at some point, and maybe still took part in sorties. An inconspicuous man was sitting on a bench a little distance from the commandant, holding a notebook and a pen in his hands. Mole noticed a large black and white photo in a frame on the wall. A young man with a blonde forelock and an embroidered shirt slightly bowed his head, looking sincerely and recklessly, it seemed, straight into the eyes. A terribly familiar face, but where from? Mole glanced at the photo every now and then. The commandant's voice was thick, commanding. Well, let's get acquainted, he said heartily. I'm Semyon Mikhalich, and this is my assistant, you could say, Commissar. Vladimir Nikolaevich. The inconspicuous man nodded his head affirmatively, looking closely at the guests. Vasily Denisich, Pathfinder muttered reluctantly. Iron, after a moment's hesitation, also gave his name, but so quickly that no one could make out anything. Mole also said his name in a rapid manner, giving his nickname as well. However, no one asked him again, although the commissar made a note in his notebook. Igon Mikhailovich, said Litvin. Well, we've met, the commandant rumbled, but I still ask you to show your documents to our commissar. Don't blame me. These are the times, you understand. Not long ago, all sorts of bandits came to us from the metro. Since the mutants have been guarding the road, at least this scum is gone. The stalkers took out their IDs and handed them over to the commissar, who immediately began to rewrite the data into a notebook, periodically comparing their faces with poor-quality photographs. Meanwhile, a slender girl with a fringe brought in several steaming, chipped porcelain cups on a tray. Mole appreciated them. They were apparently received at the highest level. Porcelain cups were usually kept for special occasions, even at Hansa, and at this half-impoverished station, they were probably a great rarity. Although who knows, maybe they have a crockery store nearby. Nevertheless, Mole felt like an important person for a moment. The girl quickly glanced at him and lowered her eyes again. And the commandant continued. "Have they finally sent you from the big metro? Answered our prayers? But so many years have passed. Now you can't find any traces or ends. Well, try. Maybe you'll dig up something. Where do you think you should look?" If only I knew what he was talking about, thought Mole. But Iron got his bearings faster and said vaguely, "I think you have some kind of park nearby?" "But it's better not to go into the park," the commandant said unexpectedly sharply. And then he seemed ashamed of his rudeness. "Ask why." He looked around at the audience. And, since no one asked, he answered himself. "Because I have a hunch. My heart tells me. This park is not a good place here. You'll get lost there, and then I'll answer for you. Even the mutants there are not like in the city. Ours haven't been going there for a long time." "No, better take a look around the area. But don't tell anyone at the station. There's no need to torment people's souls, to give them false hopes. They've just calmed down. If they ask why you came, figure out for yourself what you need here. Maybe you're looking for weapons depots. Although, what depots are there? Everything nearby has long been stolen, and it's too far to go in search of adventure." Mole was slightly taken aback, and he wasn't the only one. Iron's face clearly said, "We're keeping it secret here, but it turns out everyone already knows everything." And only Pathfinder didn't lose his head and chimed in. "Of course, warehouses, what else? Let's tell people that. We have no secrets from the people." The commandant sighed. "In the old days I would have gone with you myself, but now my strength is not what it used to be. My head is splitting in the mornings. My vision has become worse." He thoughtfully rubbed the scar on his forehead. "We will provide you with all the conditions. We will give you a tent. You can eat in the kitchen at any time. There is always something there. There is enough food for now. We are not complaining. We have started a subsidiary farm. We breed rats, and our stalkers are eagles, hunters. Even people from Textilia now come to our region to hunt, but I do not believe that there will be any sense in your investigation." "Well, go and look." He caught Mole's gaze and seemed slightly embarrassed. "This is, so to speak, the patron of the station, a famous Ryazan poet." The commissioner nodded and added importantly, "The people need some kind of guidelines, cultural values, so to speak, not by bread alone. We even celebrate his birthday. The people need an idea." "That's true," the commandant sighed. "And what do we have here? Everyone is sitting in their own corner. We rarely even go to neighboring stations." When we first came to our senses after Judgment Day, the survivors seemed to want to unite, to establish contacts. We tried to maintain relations with the big metro. We wanted to somehow arrange an open section, to put up a roof or something. But we never got around to it. And then, when all sorts of bad guys started coming to us, we were even glad that we didn't pave a convenient road for them. Now there's no point in thinking about it. The mutants won't let us, and nothing came of the unification. We even came up with a name, Ryazan Federation. The commandant chuckled. But in reality, it turns out that the textiles look at us askance, like we've got it all figured out in the middle. You never know. They'll start demanding payment from us for being the scapegoats, as if it's our fault. And the Ryazan guys are mischievous, lively and reckless. They have their own places where they go for food and swag, and they are very afraid that we will cross their path. And we, on the contrary, are open-hearted to everyone. Come, dear guests. The commandant spread his arms dramatically, and suddenly he began to cough, clutching his chest. The mole looked away. Vladimir Nikolaevich hastily thrust some rag, a handkerchief, or something at the commandant. The commandant pushed his hand away in annoyance. Gradually the attack passed, and the still pale commandant leaned back. Yes, they already told us about the Ryazan people, Krot said hurriedly, to break the oppressive silence that had ensued. And further along the line, beyond Ryazansky Prospect, is there nothing? What could be there? Vikino is an open station, and what is happening behind it is unknown. Further on there is Lyubertsy. We don't know if there are any living people there, although there are different rumors. A man from Ryazanka said that sometimes it was as if someone was scratching towards them from the surface. Even the sentries heard voices, but they didn't open it. They were afraid. In fact, who could be scratching there after 20 years? Either they imagine it because of a guilty conscience, or these are restless souls moaning. Hearing this, Mole looked at the commandant with interest, and he continued calmly. The local stalkers know the conditional signals, and the Ryazan ones open the door for them. And if not, then any stalker knows what can reach us. We'll let them in. And there's also a hole in the tunnel, known only to our own. Will you let us back in when we go up? Mole asked, as if jokingly. Don't worry about that. We won't let you go up there alone, the commandant smiled. Pyotr Nikolaevich will show you around. He's our main breadwinner. He knows all the surrounding areas thoroughly, and he'll tell you all the details. The mole understood that the commandant was hinting that it would be better to be friends with him. Otherwise, nothing would work out for them. Here the same girl brought in a plate of homemade cookies on a tray, and everyone fell silent, waiting for her to leave. Mole sipped his tea with pleasure. Although it was thin, it seemed real, apparently from previous supplies. I had to tell the commandant all over again how we got there, and in general terms what was going on in the big metro. Mole was exhausted. It had been a stormy day. He wanted to eat something more substantial than thin soup and tea with cookies. To drink, to relax. Finally, the commandant warned once again. Stay away from the park, and don't believe the rumors that people go there. Otherwise they'll tell you such things. Like werewolves live there, and all that. If you don't understand something, come to me, we'll figure it out together. Keep me informed, so to speak. When we were already leaving, we ran into a thin, nervous man at the door. What do you have, Andrich? Asked the commandant. Terakova is misbehaving. What about her? So it is. She was ordered to burn the toys. But she doesn't want to. She won't give them back. She can't take them by force, can she? Ugh! The commandant grunted with annoyance, scratching the back of his head. Okay, don't touch her for now. What a crazy woman, they told everyone. These toys are nothing but a plague. They collect dirt. Okay, I'll talk to her myself, Mole was thinking as they walked. The commandant obviously took them for some other group, and that was to their advantage. Mole didn't know what kind of story they had there, and what kind of investigation they were expecting, what kind of messengers from the big metro. But all of that could be found out with time. The main thing was that they had received approval for any search, and yet it was strange that everything had gone so smoothly, without any obstacles. It would have been better if they had stood their ground, proved it.
Mole's instinct told him that when everything started out so smoothly, some big dirty trick was sure to follow. And it all started surprisingly well. Of course, they had suffered a lot of fear with that light in the tunnel, but in the end, everyone was alive. Although Litvin was still kind of strange, it was still unknown how this adventure would come back to haunt him. And Mole didn't consider the search for the entrance and the unkind welcome to be any difficulties. Now, if they had lost a couple of people on the way, or, for example, had not been able to find the entrance to Tekstilchiki by morning, and had to return to the big metro past the mutant's abode, that would have been a problem. But so what? Everyone is alive, and as for the nervousness, the stalker profession is not for weaklings.
No one promised an easy life. Something seemed strange to him at the station, but he couldn't figure out what it was yet. And also, the commandant's face seemed too open and simple. Mole could have sworn that the guy was very clever. A couple of times, Mole had been treated badly with such honest faces. At first glance, people here were even better off than at Textile. Perhaps because it was the middle of the 3 stations, and residents could indulge in the illusion of relative safety. Mole noted that the criminal-looking individuals he had met in abundance, for example, at Shabalovka, and even at Prolatarka, which was far away, were not at all noticeable here, and he was filled with respect for the heads of both stations. However, the commandant had said that this was largely due to the mutants, and they had apparently exterminated their own internal enemies. At first glance, simple, hard-working people lived here, but Mole was used to not trusting first impressions. And yet, of the 2 stations, he probably liked Kuzminki better. Either the reason was the funny metal inserts on the walls depicting little animals, or the women here dressed better. There was less dazzle in their eyes. Or the station itself looked less cluttered. Although there was something like that here, too. As if there was something in the air. Something unspoken. Oppressive. He again noticed those strange, unkind looks, as if the locals were afraid that strangers might take something valuable from them. And, in Krot's opinion, they had nothing to take. And the smell. Some strange smell was sometimes felt here. Krot would have found it difficult to say what kind. Heavy, sourish, making even him, an unpretentious person, sometimes wince. When they returned from the commandant, it turned out that Fyodor had managed to find a common language with the redhead. He was telling her something enthusiastically, and she was listening, bursting into laughter. This unpleasantly pricked Krot. Although, what did he really care about the unfamiliar girl from the Red Line, whom he was most likely seeing for the first and last time? They were terribly sleepy. Everyone was very tired, so after a quick bite to eat, they went to bed. The men were given a large tent, where old mattresses and tattered, dirty rugs were scattered on the floor. The red-haired girl was taken away somewhere by the commandant's wife, an imperious woman with traces of her former beauty in a purple dress and heavy hoop earrings, who was moaning over her. "What a skinny thing you are. Why did you get involved with men? You should be sitting in a hospital somewhere and not sticking your nose out." Pathfinder did not object. Perhaps he decided that this was a convenient opportunity to improve relations with the locals, that the women would find a common language. It's strange, thought Mole. The commandant had obviously already been informed that there was a girl in the detachment, but he did not interfere. It turned out that Pathfinder had not gone to the people at Tekstilshiki in vain. He pulled out a bottle of cloudy swill and poured it into everyone's mugs.
Well, to good luck. To the fact that we made it.
We'll have to come up with a plan of action.
Litvine said.
I used to be at the station before the Holocaust. I have a rough idea of what was up there. There's a market by the metro and the road to the park goes right past it. But things have probably changed a lot since then. We need to ask people what kind of mutants live here and what we should be afraid of first. I don't feel right here.
Iron grumbled.
Everyone was looking at us sideways at Textile. The management didn't hide the fact that they didn't need us, and here the commandant is just glowing. I don't like it when they put things so softly. It's not a good sign.
And what is it that he thinks we should be looking for here? Let's solve problems as they arise, advised Litvin. I think it will soon become clear on its own. Before he finally passed out, Mole asked Pathfinder, "Why did you drag the girl along with you? What, there are no men left on the Red Line except you and Iron? Why are you so worried about her?" Pathfinder got angry. She asked for it herself. If it were up to me, I would stay away from women. All troubles come from them. But, since the authorities ordered it, you have to endure it. "Come on," Iron muttered, settling more comfortably on the holey mattress covered with well-worn flannel blankets. "Calm down, my friends," Litvin said softly. "Only calm down. The ways of Providence are inscrutable. Our young companion may prove very useful." Mole decided that this guy was very complicated and, most likely, he was sent here by the highbrows. That's how Mole himself called the Brahmins from Polis. But there was an advantage to this. They wouldn't send a fool, which meant that Litvin could be useful. And as for the girl, it remained unclear. Did she ask for it herself or did her superiors order her? It's not that simple. You never know who asks to go on a hike. It doesn't mean that everyone who wants to will be taken. Most likely she was skillfully pushed into asking for it, describing new interesting places, luring her with new opportunities. Caught off guard, Pathfinder blurted out too much in the heat of the moment, which is what Mole was counting on. All this had to be clarified over time. They agreed that tomorrow, from early morning, they would start collecting information. Iron suggested that they split into groups for this purpose. Mole, despite his fatigue, could not fall asleep for a long time, thinking. What should they look for in the park? Weapons?
What do they expect to find there, if even the Hansa management, not inclined to waste money, gave him a generous advance and promised to pay him more at the end of the expedition if he found something useful or obtained at least interesting information? It is clear with the Reds. They can work for ideological reasons. It is not for nothing that 3 of them showed up from their line at once. True, Iron would not go on reconnaissance for the idea. But Pathfinder probably could. And the girl, you don't need to be a fortune teller, was promised it is clear that this is her chance to distinguish herself. She is probably happy to try. She thinks
It's not that it upset Krot. He couldn't stand these stalkers. He just wanted to know, were the Nazis not interested in searching the park? Usually, when strange rumors arise, they are right there, in the front ranks. And the stranger the rumor, the more willing they are to believe it and fork out. They even have some kind of project on an herbe. Krot didn't go into the details, but it seems that they have a whole group that is engaged in almost calling secret forces for help, gathering all sorts of sorcerers and magicians. They have nothing better to do. However, the stalkers did not like to cooperate with residents of other stations. And it is possible that one of the Reich's intelligence officers had already set off alone in the direction they were interested in, and got ahead of them. Any nondescript guy at the station could actually be an agent of the Reich. Although it's unlikely, in this community every new person is in plain sight, and the commandant wouldn't hide it from them if more guests from the big metro came here. It was also significant that the Bauman Alliance did not send its stalkers. The leadership there included people who stood firmly on the ground with both feet. They would not be interested in a rumor, for example, about a superweapon with which they could establish their power in the entire metro. But precise information about food supplies, fuel, and drug warehouses could have prompted the Alliance leadership to organize an expedition. The conclusion suggested itself. The rumors about something interesting in the park were very dark and unreliable. They were sent for reconnaissance. However, if Fedor is Boatman's man, and Boatman is somehow connected with the Bauman Alliance, although he acts exclusively in his own interests, it can be assumed that the Alliance also has its own eyes and ears here. And this Litvin, a strange guy, stubbornly pretends that he is on his own. Maybe in Polis they told him to keep a low profile. Mole did not believe that someone would undertake such a thing at their own peril and risk. It was probably all paid for. The question is, by whom? End of preview fragment. Text provided by Litrees LLC. Read this book in its entirety by purchasing the full legal version on Litres. You can safely pay for the book with a Visa, MasterCard, Maestro bank card, from a mobile phone account, from a payment terminal, at an MTS or Svyaznoy store, via PayPal, WebMoney, Yandex.Money, QIWI wallet, bonus cards, or any other method convenient for you. Notes. 1. A.S. Pushkin. Demons.